Hey my watchers, welcome. Today we are gonna see, what if female Harry Potter had married toxic Draco? Join Patreon for early access exclusive content of Super Op stories. Also contents that's too far for YouTube. You will get 400 content there, please do check that too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. I want you to be mine, Draco whispered so Harriet Potter couldn't really understand what he said. What? Harriet Potter said, turning around to face him. Do you want to be my girlfriend? Draco asked confidently, expecting her to say yes. Harriet Potter didn't know what to say. Draco had only talked to her a few times in class, mostly to get answers for assignments. She didn't mind giving him the answers, seeing as they were both Slytherins. She did wonder why he wasn't mean to her like he was with everyone else. Now she knew why. Well? Draco asked impatiently. Harriet Potter knew that he expected her to say yes without thinking. That is what any other Slytherin girl would have done. She needed more time to think about her answer. After all, being Draco's girlfriend would cause a lot of changes for her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to deal with that. I can't give you an answer right now. Why not? Draco asked, looking surprised and a little hurt. He wasn't used to a girl making him wait. I want to be sure I make the right decision, Harriet Potter said, slightly smiling at him. Class was dismissed and everyone started leaving. Fine, but you will end up saying yes to me, Draco said, a little harsher than he meant to as he stood up. How do you know that? Harriet Potter said, raising her eyebrow at him, not liking the tone of his voice. He quickly regretted that he was unable to control his emotions while talking to Harriet Potter. Draco reached over his desk and gently grabbed Harriet Potter's hand, trying to ease the tension between them. He smiled at her, then kissed the back of her hand. He hoped she would forgive him for speaking to her in that manner. Harriet Potter couldn't believe what Draco did. She never imagined he could be so kind. Her heart started pounding faster the moment he touched her. Draco's smile was enchanting. She always thought his eyes were beautiful, but even more now that they were looking right at her. His hand felt strong and comforting. Harriet Potter developed goosebumps when Draco's big soft lips kissed her skin. He was relieved when he saw her expression soften. Draco released Harriet Potter's hand, then proceeded to leave. When he got to the door, he turned around and smiled again at her. I know, because I can be very persuasive, he said as he winked at Harriet Potter, then left the room. Harriet Potter rose up and gathered her books. She couldn't help smiling to herself as she touched the spot Draco kissed. As she was leaving, she thought Draco might be right about him being persuasive. She was starting to think that she may have been wrong about him. Harriet Potter quickly walked past the Slytherin common room and up the stairs to her room. She was trying to avoid seeing Draco or anyone else who might ask her about what happened in class today. Harriet Potter walked into her room and shut the door. She realized that she had the room to herself tonight. Her roommate, Millicent Bulstrode, wasn't feeling good and would be spending the night in the hospital wing. Harriet Potter took a shower and changed into her sleeping clothes. She walked over to Millicent's cat, who was meowing at the door, and stroked its fur before letting it out of the room. Harriet Potter picked up her potions book and sat on her bed. She needed to review a few spells for her exam tomorrow. After about an hour of studying, she decided it was time for bed. She put her book away and lied on her bed, pulling the covers over her. She stared at the ceiling, recited the spells for the exam. Her thoughts started to drift to Draco. She thought about how soft his lips were when he kissed the back of her hand. Harriet Potter remembered his fantastic smile and how it completely changed his face. He didn't look mean, more like someone she could be friends with. His eyes were by far his best feature. Stunning was the word that came to mind. Harriet Potter shook her head and stopped herself from thinking about him like that. She needed to think about if she should or shouldn't say yes to him. If he treated her kindly like he did today, she could say yes. But Harriet Potter didn't know what to expect from him. She didn't know him well enough. From what she saw, he would ignore his girlfriends who were lavishing him with attention. Harriet Potter knew she wouldn't be begging for his affection. She also didn't know if he would accept how little time she would have for him. Harriet Potter didn't want to give up her studying and reading time. She loved learning and being top in her house. Maybe she could convince him to study with her sometime so they would have more time together. Then she thought about how a lot of people didn't like Draco. Would people stop liking her too if she was his girlfriend? Would she have to deal with people being mean to her as well? Her own roommate, Millicent Bulstrode, didn't like him. Probably because he always sneered at her. Harriet Potter didn't think Millicent would stop being friends with her, but she wasn't entirely sure. They have been friends ever since Harriet Potter started attending Hogwarts. She would probably try and convince her to not be his girlfriend. Harriet Potter had friends in other houses as well. She didn't know how Draco would like that. He had to know though. Draco and Harriet Potter had a few classes together. He had to have seen her talking to them. She was sure none of her non-Slytherin friends would accept him being her boyfriend. The only one she thought that might would be Luna Lovegood. She was very nice and sweet. Harriet Potter decided to stop thinking about Draco and the potions exam and quickly fell asleep. Harriet Potter awoke the next morning to the sound of Millicent's cat scratching at the door. She stood up out of bed and walked to the door to let it in. It ran in and jumped onto Millicent's bed and quickly fell asleep. Harriet Potter went to the bathroom to brush her teeth and comb her hair. She went back to her bed and sat for a minute. She then noticed an envelope on her nightstand. She wondered how it got there. Harriet Potter picked up the envelope. It was green with a silver ribbon wrapped around it. It had a big capital D printed on it. She was almost sure it was from Draco. On the back it said, "Open when you are alone." She was alone but decided to open it after she finished getting dressed. Harriet Potter finished getting dressed and walked over to her nightstand. She picked up the envelope and pulled on the ribbon. Harriet Potter pulled on the silver ribbon. As soon as the ribbon was off, the envelope opened up and floated out of her hand. It hovered just slightly in front of her. A tiny, single, red spark came out of the envelope. It headed up toward the ceiling and stopped just before it hit. It made a small crackling noise, then burst. It made Harriet Potter jump back a little. A dozen small, colorful bubbles floated in the air. One by one they slowly popped. Very tiny drops of water landed on her hair, face, and clothing. Harriet Potter noticed that she now smelled like vanilla. When the last bubble burst, a small note fell out of it. Harriet Potter picked up the note and read it. Harriet Potter. She're so smart and beautiful. I smile every time I think about she. I will dream about she every night until she say yes. Draco. Harriet Potter's heart melted as she read Draco's words. She was in shock. She couldn't believe what she had just read. She read it again to make sure she hadn't misread it. Harriet Potter had no idea Draco felt this way about her. She thought Draco was the kind of person who concealed his feelings, so for him to express them meant a lot to Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter took the note, folded it up and put it in her Slytherin robe pocket. She was so happy. She couldn't stop smiling. No one had ever expressed feelings like that towards her. Draco was making it hard to say no. Harriet Potter grabbed her potions book and walked to the common room. It was quiet. There was only one student sitting in a chair reading. It was still early and most of the students were just starting to wake up. Harriet Potter headed to the Great Hall to eat breakfast. She liked going early. She didn't have to squeeze in between students to sit down, and it was quiet. She entered the Great Hall and noticed there were about a dozen or less students at each table. Harriet Potter sat at the end of the Slytherin table away from the other students. She didn't really want to talk to anyone right now. She wanted to review her notes for the potions exam while she ate. Harriet Potter heard footsteps approaching her but didn't look up. She was too engulfed in reading her notes. Someone sat down right next to her. She then turned to look, and it was Draco. Draco sat with his back to the table. He was turned a little towards Harriet Potter. "Good morning, Draco," Harriet Potter said, smiling at him. She then quickly turned away from him. She didn't want him to see her blush. Draco saw Harriet Potter blush. He enjoyed having that effect on her. Her reaction to him made Draco think he was making progress in getting Harriet Potter to be his girlfriend. He couldn't resist moving closer to her. He wanted to be as close as possible to her. Harriet Potter felt Draco move really close to her. She then felt his hand touch the back of her head and stroke down her hair. Goosebumps ran down her spine. He leaned his face close to her. His lips were almost touching her ear. Harriet Potter's heart started beating really fast. She then heard him inhale. You smell good. Look good too, Draco whispered into her ear. He could smell the vanilla on her and knew she had opened his envelope. Draco moved his head back a little to see Harriet Potter's reaction. Harriet Potter looked at him out of the corner of her eye. She knew Draco wanted to get a reaction out of her. She decided not to let him have the upper hand. She resisted blushing and kept herself from acting nervous. She turned to look at Draco. She smiled at him, then grabbed his face under his chin. You're pretty good looking yourself, she said, winking at him. She could see the shocked look on his face for a second. Draco quickly changed his expression to a smirk, still wanting to be in control. He admired Harriet Potter for trying to change it up and get a reaction out of him. He decided to take advantage. He looked at Harriet Potter's lips and licked his lips. Draco started to lean into her. Harriet Potter saw Draco look at her lips, then lick his own. She noticed him starting to lean towards her. Harriet Potter tensed up. She had flirted with him too strongly, she thought. Now he was going to try and kiss her. Harriet Potter wanted to let him, but she couldn't. Not when she still hadn't given him an answer. She then noticed other students were watching them. She suddenly came to her senses. Their lips were about to touch and she stood up. Harriet Potter swiftly grabbed her book and rapidly walked out of the great hall. Harriet Potter, where are you going? Draco called out, laughing slightly. Draco sensed that Harriet Potter might not kiss him. He took a chance anyway. Sure, he wanted her to. He knew she was the type of girl that thought before she acted. He liked that about her. She wasn't easily influenced, so Draco knew he had to be completely honest with her. He had never done that with anyone else. He never wanted anyone else as much as he wanted Harriet Potter. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Authors. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Chapter 4. Harriet Potter walked as quick as she could without running. She did not want Draco to catch up to her. She needed to be away from him to clear her head. Draco is so charismatic, she thought. Resisting him was so hard. He definitely knows how to be a flirt. Harriet Potter headed to the hospital wing. She wanted to see if Millicent was feeling any better. She also wanted to talk to her about what was going on with Draco. She entered and searched the room for Millicent. She didn't see her. Harriet Potter noticed there were a lot of sick students. Almost every bed was occupied. They looked like they all had the same sickness. Each of them were sweating and their faces were red. Most of them were sleeping soundly, which was a good thing. It meant they weren't in too much pain. Can I help you, Miss L/N? Asked Madame Pomfrey. Madame Pomfrey knew Harriet Potter by name. Harriet Potter had volunteered to help a few times in the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey would ask for help when a sickness broke out among the students. Harriet Potter thought she might be asking again soon with so many students in here now. I'm looking for Millicent Bulstrode, replied Harriet Potter. This way, Miss L/N, directed Madame Pomfrey. Millicent was putting on her boots. She looked up when she heard Harriet Potter calling to her. Millicent, Harriet Potter said cheerily. Harriet Potter sat down on the bed next to Millicent. How are you feeling? Harriet Potter asked. I'm doing a lot better. Glad to be leaving this place. Millicent said, happy and relieved. She finished lacing up her boots and stood up. She grabbed her Slytherin robe and threw it over her shoulder. Ready to go? Millicent asked Harriet Potter. Yeah, Harriet Potter answered. Harriet Potter and Millicent headed back to their dorm room. On the way there, Harriet Potter was desperately hoping not to run into Draco. Millicent, did you have the same sickness as the other students in there? Harriet Potter asked while picking up her pace. Yes, luckily it's only a 24-hour sickness. It wasn't too bad. I've had worse. Why are you walking so fast? Millicent inquired, breathing a little heavily. I'm trying to avoid running into someone. Harriet Potter responded, looking around the corner. Who? Requested Millicent, not understanding what was going on with Harriet Potter. I'll explain when we get to our room. Come on, Harriet Potter stated, hurrying to the Slytherin house entrance. They entered the Slytherin common room. Harriet Potter didn't look around, she just went past everyone and headed straight to her room. She was going so fast she didn't even notice Millicent had stopped to talk to another student. Harriet Potter entered her room and sat down on her bed. She then noticed Millicent wasn't in the room with her. She didn't want to go out and check where she was and possibly run into Draco. She decided just to wait for her in the room. After a few minutes, Millicent came in. "Millicent, I'm sorry I left you," Harriet Potter said, hoping she wasn't mad. "It's okay. I'm the one that stopped to talk without telling you," she explained. Millicent put her robe away. She sat down on her bed facing Harriet Potter. Her cat heard her voice and came running out from under the bed. It hopped up onto Millicent's bed and started purring and rubbing its head against her hand. "So now tell me, who are you trying to avoid?" Millicent inquired, looking curiously at Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter was so nervous to tell her. She knew Millicent was not going to like the idea of Draco trying to be her boyfriend. "Draco Malfoy," Harriet Potter said, putting her head down and furrowing her brows. "Why? What did he do to you?" Millicent asked, angrily clenching her fist. "Calm down, Millicent. He didn't hurt me." Harriet Potter paused, nervously, not wanting to say, "He what?" she demanded to know, looking intently at Harriet Potter. He asked me to be his girlfriend," Harriet Potter said, still looking down. "Here it comes," she thought. "I knew it," Millicent shouted. For the past few weeks, she noticed Draco looking at Harriet Potter in class. He was practically drooling over her. She also noticed how he started asking Harriet Potter for answers to classwork just to talk to her. He would also wipe his scowl from his face when talking to her. He was mean to everyone but not to Harriet Potter. Millicent knew it wasn't her imagination because even Pansy Parkinson mentioned it to her. She wanted to tell Harriet Potter, but she knew Harriet Potter would think it was nothing. "You knew? How?" Harriet Potter exclaimed. Millicent began to explain what she noticed over the past few weeks. "I didn't mention it to you because you would think it was nothing," Millicent explained. "You're right, I would have thought it was just a coincidence," stated Harriet Potter. "I still can't believe Draco asked me to be his girlfriend. At first I thought he wasn't serious, that he was just messing with me," said Harriet Potter. "What makes you think he's not?" Millicent asked, skeptical. Harriet Potter told Millicent about everything Draco had done. She told her about Draco kissing her hand and the envelope with the note. Although Harriet Potter didn't tell her exactly what the note said, just that it was sweet. She wanted to keep that between her and Draco. She told Millicent what happened in the Great Hall as well. "It sounds like you're starting to like him. Are you?" Millicent said, worried. "I don't know, maybe. I haven't made up my mind yet," Harriet Potter stated. "Well, you know how I feel about him. You are definitely too good for him," Millicent said, trying to convince Harriet Potter as well. Harriet Potter turned and looked at the clock. She saw that it was time to go to potions class. Normally she would be happy to go to class, but Draco would be there. She wouldn't be able to avoid him anymore. There was an exam today, so at least there wouldn't be a lot of time for conversation. It's time to head to potions. "You got better just in time for an exam," Harriet Potter joked, smiling at Millicent. "Lucky me," Millicent said sarcastically with a forced smile. Both girls gathered their things for class and headed out to the common room. There were still a couple of students sitting on the couches. Harriet Potter felt relieved when she didn't see Draco. Harriet Potter and Millicent walked out of the common room. They hurried through the hallways and quickly ran to the stairs, trying to catch them before they moved. There were a lot of students running to the stairs with the same idea. Millicent was able to get on just before they moved. Harriet Potter was pushed aside by another student and didn't make it. She would have to wait a few minutes until it came back. Harriet Potter leaned over the rail with her hands behind her back, holding her book. She enjoyed looking at all the stairs moving. She suddenly felt someone pull her book out of her hand. Harriet Potter turned around, ready to yell at whoever took her book. "Hello, beautiful," Draco chimed, smiling at Harriet Potter. He was holding the book slightly out of her reach. "Draco, will you give me my book back?" Harriet Potter insisted, rolling her eyes and holding her hand out. Draco stepped closer to Harriet Potter and gently grabbed her hand that she was holding out to him. Harriet Potter tried pulling her hand away, but Draco held onto it. "I have a better idea. How about you let me walk you to class and I'll carry your book for you?" he requested, almost pleading. Harriet Potter heard the stairs coming back. She didn't want to miss them again. She quickly decided to let him walk her to class. It would be the fastest way to get her book back, and he did ask nicely. "All right, but let's go quickly. We are going to miss the stairs," Harriet Potter ordered. They ran for the stairs and jumped on just before it started moving again. Draco didn't let go of Harriet Potter's hand. He wanted to hold onto her hand as long as she let him. Harriet Potter noticed that Draco was still holding her hand as they walked off the stairs into the hallway. She was just about to release her hand when she felt Draco start to rub circles with his thumb on the back of her hand. Her heart started to beat fast and she could feel her face heating up. She smiled at how sweet Draco was being. Draco looked at Harriet Potter out of the corner of his eyes. He could see her smiling. He felt so proud of himself for making Harriet Potter smile. Draco didn't want this moment to end. Harriet Potter could hear students approaching from another hallway. She stopped and turned to Draco. She slowly pulled her hand out of his. Draco was upset that the moment ended so quickly, but he put a smile on for Harriet Potter.
"I'm sorry, Draco."
"I don't want people to assume we're a couple," Harriet Potter explained. "I understand, Harriet Potter," Draco acknowledged, trying to not sound upset. Draco and Harriet Potter continued walking to class. They entered the classroom together. Harriet Potter proceeded to her usual seat and Draco followed her. Draco grabbed her chair and pulled it out for her to sit. "Thank you, Draco," Harriet Potter beamed at him. Draco then sat down next to Harriet Potter instead of his usual seat behind her. Harriet Potter didn't mind Draco sitting down next to her, but she knew it was going to cause a problem. That was Millicent's seat, and she was not going to be happy seeing Draco sitting there. Harriet Potter wondered why Millicent wasn't sitting there already. She had caught the staircase. Harriet Potter looked around and saw Millicent coming towards Draco with a mad look on her face. "Get out of my seat, Malfoy!" Millicent shouted angrily.
"No.
I'm sitting here," Draco hissed through gritted teeth, glaring at Millicent. Draco turned his back to Millicent. She shoved Draco hard on his back, almost knocking him entirely out of the seat. Draco braced himself, trying to avoid falling on top of Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter scooted her chair back quickly to get out of the way. Draco immediately stood up and turned to face Millicent. They stood there glaring at each other. Everyone's attention was now on Draco and Millicent. "Draco, Millicent, please stop, you're going to get into trouble," Harriet Potter pleaded. It was too late. Professor Snape came out of his office after hearing all the noise Draco and Millicent were causing. "What is going on here? Mr. Malfoy, sit down, you too, Miss Bulstrode. Detention for both of you this evening," Professor Snape snapped, irritated. Draco sat back down in the seat next to Harriet Potter and Millicent sat down where Draco usually sat, behind Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter scooted her seat back to the desk and didn't look at Draco or Millicent. She couldn't believe how fast the situation escalated. She felt like it was her fault. She should have stopped Millicent from confronting Draco when she saw her coming towards him. She could have asked Draco to move out of Millicent's seat. Now they both have detention because of her. Draco was having trouble concentrating on his exam. He was so worried Harriet Potter would never want to speak to him again. He deeply regretted acting like that in front of her. He needed to talk to her. Draco didn't want this confrontation to end his chances with her. Millicent disliked Draco even more now. He was already interfering in their friendship and he wasn't even her boyfriend. He's going to be a lot worse if he does become her boyfriend, she thought. Harriet Potter finished her exam. She picked up her book and the exam. She went up to Professor Snape's desk and placed her exam down. As she walked out of class, she noticed Draco and Millicent were still taking their exam. She decided to wait in the hallway for one of them to come out. Draco hurriedly finished his exam and put it on Professor Snape's desk when he saw Harriet Potter turn hers in. He rushed out of the classroom to catch Harriet Potter. He was surprised to see her sitting on the bench just down the hallway. Harriet Potter saw Draco come out of the classroom and proceed towards her. Draco sat down next to Harriet Potter. He started to talk when Harriet Potter interrupted him.
"I'm sorry, Draco."
"It's all my fault you got into trouble," Harriet Potter said, looking upset. Draco could not understand why Harriet Potter was apologizing to him. How could she blame herself? He was the one who lost his temper and argued with her friend. She didn't do anything wrong. It's not your fault. You have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who acted improper, Draco stated, staring at her. He touched the side of her face. Harriet Potter gazed at him with a small smile. It's not like I haven't had detention before. It's not a big deal. Come on, let me see your pretty smile, Draco said, trying to get Harriet Potter to cheer up. Harriet Potter blushed hearing Draco say she had a pretty smile. Harriet Potter pursed her lips, trying hard not to smile, knowing what he was trying to do. Draco smiled at her with all his teeth showing while raising his eyebrows up and down several times. He looked so funny. She couldn't resist anymore and started laughing. Draco laughed along with Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter spotted Millicent coming out of the classroom. She wanted to talk to her too. Harriet Potter stood up. Draco, I have to go. I need to talk to Millicent, Harriet Potter explained while walking away. All right, Draco responded, sounding disappointed. I will see you later. Draco watched as Harriet Potter ran down the hallway to catch Millicent. He stayed watching her until he couldn't see her anymore. Draco stood there feeling relief that he had not messed up his chances with Harriet Potter. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Authors. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy Chapter 5. Harriet Potter caught up to Millicent and they talked about what happened in class. They both agreed that it had gone too far, and they didn't want the incident to interfere with their friendship. So I'm going to head to our dorm room before lunch. You coming? Millicent asked Harriet Potter. No, I'm going to the hospital wing to see if Madame Pomfrey needs help. Harriet Potter responded. All right, later, Millicent started walking away while waving goodbye. Later, Harriet Potter waved back and started heading towards the hospital. When she arrived, there were still a lot of students sick in the beds. She went up to Madame Pomfrey and asked if she could volunteer to help. Madame Pomfrey was happy to accept her help. She asked Harriet Potter to go around to all the beds and freshen the water in the pitchers and to get as many of the students to drink water as she could. They needed to stay hydrated. Harriet Potter made her way to the first bed nearest her. It was a Slytherin boy, a first year. He looked like he was through the worst of it. His face wasn't red and he was sitting up reading. She refilled his pitcher of water and poured him a glass. Harriet Potter made sure he drank it all and moved on to the next set of beds. They were also Slytherin students. Harriet Potter approached the next bed that had a Gryffindor student lying in it. She asked him how he was feeling. He didn't answer. He crossed his arms and looked away from her. She refilled his pitcher and offered him a glass of water. Get away from me, he said as he swatted the glass away. The glass shattered on the floor. Harriet Potter pulled out her wand and repaired the glass with the water in it. She set it down on the little table next to the bed. What's your problem? Harriet Potter asked the Gryffindor, who was now glaring at her. I don't want anything from someone who is friends with Malfoy. Fine, pour your own water. She was calm, not wanting him to know that he had an effect on her. She turned to the next bed. Another Gryffindor. The girl in that bed looked at her angrily. I don't want anything from you either, putting her hand up to keep Harriet Potter from coming any closer. All right, but Madame Pomfrey wants everyone to drink at least a glass of water, Harriet Potter informed her while walking away, trying to maintain her composure. She informed them about the water for Madame Pomfrey. Harriet Potter wanted them to get better so they could leave. The quicker students got better, the less chance there was for it to keep spreading, and then maybe Madame Pomfrey could take a much-needed break. The next bed was empty, which Harriet Potter was happy about. It meant someone was well enough to leave. One less student spreading the sickness. The bed after that one was not. Harriet Potter could see he was also a Gryffindor. He was starting to wake up. Oh great, she thought, not wanting to have another confrontation. I know you don't want me to touch your water either, she told the boy who was now awake. Huh? Why would I not want you to touch my water? The boy said, confused. Well, your fellow Gryffindors don't want anything from me because I'm friends with Draco Malfoy, she explained. It doesn't matter to me as long as you haven't done anything to me or my friends. He reached to the table and grabbed his glasses. He put them on and ran his fingers through his hair. When he was fixing his hair, Harriet Potter noticed his lightning bolt scar. It was Harry Potter. She didn't recognize him before because she never really looked at him up close. He's usually on the opposite side of the classroom in the classes they had together. Harriet Potter wasn't much for looking around at. Students in her class, she was too busy listening to the professor or doing her assignments. Harriet Potter refilled his pitcher and handed him a glass of water. He smiled at her, grabbing the glass. "Thank you," Harry said politely, taking a drink of the water. He was still red in the face and sweating a little. He held the cold glass of water up to his forehead, trying to cool down. "You're welcome," Harriet Potter responded, smiling at Harry. She saw that he was trying to cool down, so she grabbed a small towel from the table and poured water on it. Harriet Potter sat down next to him on the bed, folded the towel into a strip and applied it to his forehead. "That feels loads better, thanks," he said, appreciating her help. Harriet Potter smiled at him and rose from the bed. She started to walk to the next bed. "Wait, what's your name?" Harry wanted to know the Slytherin who had been so kind to him. Harriet Potter looked back at him over her shoulder as she continued walking. "Harriet Potter L/N. She called back at him softly, not wanting to disturb the sleeping students. She continued on to each bed, refilling the water pitchers and helping students to drink water. Harriet Potter didn't have any more confrontations with students not wanting her help, which made her work go a lot faster. She didn't realize how much time had passed. Lunch was almost over. Harriet Potter informed Madame Pomfrey that she was finished and leaving for lunch. Harriet Potter made her way towards the door. Harry saw that Harriet Potter was heading for the exit. He decided to talk to her again before she left, even though he was hardly able to keep his eyes open. "Harriet Potter." Harry smiled weakly and slowly waved at her to come over to him. Harriet Potter quickly made her way to Harry, not having much time left. She hoped he wouldn't keep her too long. She really didn't want to miss lunch. "Do you need me to get you something?" she asked politely. No, I just... Will you be coming back later?" he asked, struggling to stay awake. Maybe after dinner," she replied, curious about his question. "Good-eye," was all he managed to say before he fell asleep. Harriet Potter looked at Harry, wondering what it was he was about to say. She didn't want to wake him, he needed to rest. Harriet Potter took Harry's glasses off and placed them on the table. Harriet Potter rushed out of the hospital wing and went to the Great Hall. She was so hungry she couldn't wait to sit down and eat. Harriet Potter finally entered the Great Hall. There were hardly any students in there. She sat down at the end of the Slytherin table and grabbed the only food left, a piece of chicken and a scoop of mashed potatoes. She sat there enjoying her meal. Draco was sitting at the opposite end of the table. He sat there waiting for Harriet Potter to come in. He didn't think she was going to show up. Then he saw her enter and sit down at the end of the table. Draco stood up and began heading towards her. Before he reached Harriet Potter, Goyle intercepted him. "Draco." Goyle could tell he wasn't pleased to be stopped. "Not now, Goyle. I'm busy," Draco said with a sneer, pushing him aside. "It's about your girl, Harriet Potter," Goyle urged, knowing Draco would want to hear what he had to say. "What about her?" Draco asked in an intimidating manner. "I saw her being rather friendly with Potter," he said, almost afraid. Draco grabbed Goyle by the front of his shirt, angry. "What do you mean? You better not be telling me lies," Draco said, threatening. "It's true. I saw her sitting beside him on his bed, smiling at him." "Where was this?" Draco asked, getting more angry. "At the hospital wing." Earlier, Goyle was now thinking maybe he shouldn't have told Draco any of this. He was afraid of what Draco was going to do to him. Draco let go of Goyle's shirt and pushed him away. He didn't want to believe what Goyle said. He couldn't stand the thought of Potter talking to Harriet Potter. Draco was sure Potter was the one trying to get attention from Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter was just being polite. That's the kind of person she is. He told himself, "You better keep your mouth shut about this. You hear me?" Draco threatened, pointing his wand under Goyle's chin. Goyle rapidly shook his head, frightened. Draco angrily motioned for him to leave. Goyle ran off, heading for the exit of the Great Hall. Draco stood there for a moment and closed his eyes, trying to calm himself. He didn't want to show any anger when he talked to Harriet Potter. He opened his eyes, ran his fingers through his hair, and took a deep breath. He walked towards Harriet Potter and stood beside her. "Better slow down or you're gonna choke," Draco joked, laughing a little. Harriet Potter didn't see Draco standing beside her and jumped when she heard his voice. "Geez, you scared me, Draco." She turned, looking up at him. "Why are you eating so fast?" Draco asked, sitting down next to her. "There isn't much time left and I'm so hungry." She put the last spoonful of mashed potatoes in her mouth. I waited for you, Draco confessed. I'm sorry, Draco, that I took so long. Harriet Potter put her hand on his arm. Draco put his hand over Harriet Potter's hand. He could see Harriet Potter's face turning red, which he took as a very good sign. He wanted to have that kind of effect on her. Why did you arrive so late? Draco asked, already knowing the answer. I volunteered to help at the hospital wing. There are a lot of sick students in there, Harriet Potter answered, scanning the table for more chicken. Draco wanted to ask her about Potter, but didn't exactly know how to bring it up without sounding angry. He didn't want to make Harriet Potter uncomfortable or upset. You know, there were a couple of Gryffindors who didn't want my help because of you. Harriet Potter wanted him to know that being his friend was making people treat her different. What happened? Draco wanted to know. Harriet Potter explained to Draco everything that happened with the Gryffindors. She could tell Draco was trying to resist getting angry. He had a small smile on his face, but his fists were clenched. It wasn't all bad, not all the Gryffindors were mean. I met Harry Potter and he was friendly. Harriet Potter stated, not wanting to talk about him to Draco too much, knowing he doesn't like Harry. She definitely wasn't going to mention Harry asking if she was coming back. Draco wanted to know everything that happened between Harriet Potter and Harry. He could see that Harriet Potter wasn't going to tell him, and he didn't want to push her about it. Draco decided he would question Goyle about it later. Of course he was nice to you, you're beautiful and caring. Anyone who isn't is an idiot, Draco remarked. Harriet Potter enjoyed hearing Draco say she was beautiful. Her heart started to beat rapidly. Harriet Potter was starting to like how Draco made her feel. She never felt this way with anyone else. Harriet Potter reached her fingers up to Draco's hair and pushed some of it off his forehead. She shyly smiled at him. Draco was surprised when Harriet Potter touched his hair so softly. She had never done anything like that before. Draco was sure that he was starting to win her over. He caught her hand and placed a kiss in the palm of her hand. It was really quiet in the Great Hall. Harriet Potter realized they were the only two in there. Lunch was over and it was time to leave. Lunch is over, Draco. I better head to class, she said, getting up. I'll walk you out. Draco responded, wishing he had more time with Harriet Potter. When Draco and Harriet Potter reached the doors, they looked at each other and smiled. Draco winked at Harriet Potter before she turned and walked the opposite way down the hall. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Authors. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy, Chapter 6. Harriet Potter was exhausted from all of the exams she had taken today. She just wanted to rest for a while in her room before dinner. Harriet Potter entered her room, took off her robe and put down her books. She pulled her hair into a ponytail, then slipped off her shoes. Harriet Potter lied down on the bed looking up at the ceiling. She tries to quiet her mind and not think about anything. After a few minutes, she is unable to keep her mind quiet. She eventually starts thinking about Draco. She thought about how nice he had been to her this whole time. He was so gentle with her. He made her laugh, which she never suspected he could do. She was starting to like how he flirted with her. Harriet Potter enjoyed her encounters with him so far. She did feel bad for making him wait for an answer. She wondered when he would ask again if she would be his girlfriend. Harriet Potter still needed more time to get to know him better. She wanted to become good friends with him first. Harriet Potter always thought that the best relationships start with being good friends. Harriet Potter yawned and looked at her clock. It was still a little while longer before dinner. She was still hungry from hardly eating at lunch. Draco would probably ask her to sit next to him. She didn't like sitting near the front and she didn't really know his friends. But she wanted to get to know him better, so sitting with him would give her that opportunity. Gradually her thoughts drifted to the Gryffindor she met today, Harry Potter. If it wasn't for him, her time in the hospital today would have been unpleasant. She admired him for not judging her. Harriet Potter wondered why Harry asked if she was coming back. She had already decided to go back to help Madame Pomfrey again after dinner before Harry asked her. Harriet Potter told Harry maybe because she didn't want him thinking that she was returning because he asked, or that she liked him as more than a potential friend. Harriet Potter looked at the clock again. It was finally time to go to dinner. She stood up and slipped her shoes back on. She fixed her ponytail again and put on her Slytherin robe. She walked out of her room and went to the common room. Lots of students were leaving for dinner also. She didn't see Millicent or Draco. She exited the common room and entered the hall. As Harriet Potter was walking down the hall, she felt someone come up behind her. "Hello, beautiful," Draco said as he touched her shoulder. Harriet Potter jumped a little when Draco touched her.
DRACO.
"How is it that you can always sneak up on me?" Harriet Potter asked, smiling up at Draco. "Must be because you're so deep in thought thinking about me." Draco responded with a huge smile on his face. "Ah, you wish Draco Malfoy?" Harriet Potter bumped her shoulder into his arm playfully. "You think about me," Draco said, bumping her back, wanting to hear Harriet Potter say she does. "Maybe I do, maybe I don't," she said, shrugging her shoulders, then bumping him again. Draco smiled to himself, confident that Harriet Potter does think about him. He thought about her all the time. That's how he knew she could be a real girlfriend and not just a fling he didn't care about. They reached the staircase and students were gathered tightly trying to get on. Draco put his arm around Harriet Potter's shoulders, and he pushed their way through the crowd onto the stairs. They stepped off the stairs and headed to the Great Hall. Draco and Harriet Potter entered the Great Hall and went to the Slytherin table. Harriet Potter stopped at the end of the table to sit in her usual spot. Draco stopped and looked at Harriet Potter. "I would like it if you sat up front with me," he gently grabbed her wrist. "Come on," he said, lightly tugging. "All right." Harriet Potter responded, nervous about sitting with his friends, but happy that Draco wanted her with him. Draco's seat was always available, no one would ever sit in his spot. Crabbe and Goyle would sit one on each side of him. Draco saw that his spot was open but not enough room for Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter also noticed this. "Move over, Crabbe," Draco commanded, even though there wasn't any room to move. Crabbe looked up at Draco, confused because he couldn't. Draco glared at him. Crabbe became scared and just started pushing up against the student next to him, making him move down. Soon everyone was bumping each other and moving down. Some of them were mad about being pushed to move but realized it was Draco who was making it happen, so they just kept quiet. Draco gestured for Harriet Potter to sit down first. She did, next to Crabbe, who looked nervous about it. Draco then proceeded to sit down between her and Goyle. "You know, I could have just sat in your lap." Harriet Potter leaned over and whispered to Draco. "Too late now," she joked, smiling at Draco. Draco grinned, thinking about Harriet Potter sitting on his lap. He took pleasure in Harriet Potter's occasional flirting. "Anytime you want," Draco tapped his lap. "Okay." Harriet Potter laughed, taking notice of how cute Draco looked when he flirted with her. Everyone became quiet when Dumbledore started talking. He talked about the events of the past week. He mentioned all the sick students and how they were trying to contain it from spreading, reminding us to go to the hospital if we felt at all feverish. He gave points to Ravenclaw for having the most students to get high marks on their exams. Dumbledore also announced that Ravenclaw was in the lead for the House Cup. Slytherin was a close second. Then he waved his hands and the food appeared on the tables. "Finally!" Harriet Potter proclaimed, grabbing a pitcher and pouring herself some pumpkin juice. "Do you want a glass, Draco?" she asked, waiting for his response. "Yes, thank you," he responded, watching Harriet Potter while she poured him some. She then turned to the person sitting on the other side of her. It was Crabbe. "Would you like some?" she asked politely, waiting for his response. He just shook his head, too scared to talk. He was surprised that she offered to pour him some. "I don't think we've officially met. My name is Harriet Potter." "What's yours?" she asked, putting down the pumpkin juice and grabbing a slice of cheese pizza. Crabbe just sat there frozen, not knowing what to do. He didn't know if Draco wanted him to talk to her. He looked over at Draco, looking for an answer. "She asked you a question. Answer." Draco glared at him, not liking that he was making Harriet Potter wait for an answer. Vincent Crabbe," he replied nervously with his head down, trying to avoid eye contact with Harriet Potter. "Nice to meet you," she said, taking a big bite of her pizza. "Same," Crabbe added, wanting Harriet Potter to stop talking to him. Only because he was scared he might say something that Draco didn't like. Not because he didn't like Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter sensed Crabbe didn't really want to talk with her, so she just left him alone. She just wanted to get to know Draco's friends so it wouldn't be awkward sitting there with them. Draco watched Harriet Potter eat, content with her sitting next to him. He watched as she grabbed another slice of cheese pizza. He wasn't eating, just looking at her. Harriet Potter could see out of the corner of her eye that Draco wasn't eating, just staring at her. She decided to let him watch her a little bit more. She finished eating her second slice of pizza and drank all her pumpkin juice. She then grabbed a small cup of vanilla pudding. She stirred it with her spoon slowly. "Draco, are you just going to stare at me?" she inquired, turning to look at him. "You're so lovely it's hard to resist," he explained, looking her up and down. "Well, try. You need to eat," she responded, looking pleased with his explanation but still wanting him to eat something. "If that's what you want." Draco scooped some macaroni onto his plate and grabbed a piece of fish. Draco began to eat. Harriet Potter ate a couple of spoonfuls of her vanilla pudding. She then turned to face Draco as he ate. She rested her head in her hand and stared at him. He smiled while he ate, knowing what Harriet Potter was doing. She moved her face closer to him, trying to make him uncomfortable. "You can look at me all you want. I like it," Draco said, grinning at her. Harriet Potter thought there was probably nothing that made him uncomfortable. Draco had a lot of confidence in himself, which she thought was a good quality to have. He also had a good sense of humor, at least with her, which she also liked. Harriet Potter gathered up all her dishes she used and piled them onto her plate, cleaning her area. It was a habit she had. She didn't like leaving a mess. Draco watched her as she did this. He wondered why she bothered. It was the house elf's job to do that. He didn't say anything to her about it. "Harriet Potter, would you take a walk with me outside?" Draco asked. "Yes, I will," Harriet Potter responded, curious if it was just a walk outside or something else. "Goodbye, Vincent," Harriet Potter said as she stood up, joining Draco. "Bye," he mumbled quickly, still not looking at her. Draco and Harriet Potter exited the Great Hall and continued down the hallway. There were a few students in the hall talking and laughing. Harriet Potter noticed some students whispering to each other when they walked by. She was sure rumors would start to spread about her and Draco the more they were seen together. She couldn't stop it from happening, so she decided not to worry about it. Draco and Harriet Potter went out the front doors. The sun was starting to set. They walked until they reached a tree that was near the Black Lake. Harriet Potter leaned with her back against the tree and watched the sunset. Draco leaned against the tree facing Harriet Potter and looked at her face as she watched the sunset. He thought her face was so beautiful with the sun shining on it. Harriet Potter looked at Draco and smiled at him. He stepped close to her. He touched her lips with his thumb, wanting to kiss her. Draco resisted, though. "Was there a reason you brought me out here?" Her lips tingling from Draco's touch. "Yes, here, I got this for you." Draco pulled out a long, slender box from his robe and handed it to Harriet Potter. "Draco, you don't have to buy me things," she said, not wanting to take the gift. She didn't want him to think she was a girl that liked someone because of what they gave her. "I know, but I wanted to." "Please take it." Draco held out the box towards her. Harriet Potter took the gift from Draco. It was a black, long, slender box with a fire emblem on the front. She opened it. There was a long red stem in there. Harriet Potter gasped when she saw it and put her hand up to her mouth. She couldn't believe what he had given her. "Is this what I think it is?" she said, shocked, pulling the stem out of the box. "Yes. I know they are your favorite," Draco responded, enjoying Harriet Potter's reaction to his gift. "Where did you find one?" "They are extremely rare," Harriet Potter asked, inspecting the red stem. "My father knows people," Draco said proudly. "I can't accept this, it's way too expensive, Draco," she said as she tried putting it back in the box. Draco stopped her. "Please, Harriet Potter, I want you to have it. It's not too much," Draco pleaded with her, knowing that was the only way she would keep it. "Okay, but don't buy me any more expensive gifts," Harriet Potter requested, holding the stem in her hand. "I can't promise you that I won't," he said, smiling at Harriet Potter. "Fine, I'll let it go for now," she said, smiling back at him. "Hold the stem out away from you," Draco requested. Harriet Potter put the box on the floor, then held the stem out at arm's length. Draco pulled out his wand and put the tip of his wand on the top of the stem. "Incendio," Draco said, then removed his wand quickly. A small flame burst at the end of the stem. A rose started to bloom as the fire extinguished. The petals were orange with red tips and smelled like cinnamon. "I've only ever seen a fire rose in pictures. It's more beautiful in person and it smells wonderful." "How did you know it's my favorite flower?" Harriet Potter said, inspecting the flower. I have my ways of finding out, Draco said, not wanting her to know. He asked Professor Sprout. Did you know when it starts to wilt you can set it on fire again and it will be new again? You can do it up to 3 times. On the last rebirth, if you do a freezing charm on it, it will stay that way forever, Draco gladly explained. That is so amazing. Harriet Potter was so grateful for the gift that Draco had given her. This is the best gift I have ever received. Thank you so very much, Draco. Harriet Potter stood on her tiptoes and hugged Draco around his neck. Draco immediately responded to her hug and wrapped his arms tightly around her waist, not wanting to ever let her go. He took great pleasure in the way Harriet Potter's arms felt around his neck and the closeness of her body to his. He knew the hug would go by quickly, so he savored every second. He felt Harriet Potter's arms loosen around his neck, so he slowly let go of her. You're welcome, Draco responded, running a hand through his hair. Draco, this was nice, but I need to go now. I'm going to help at the hospital, Harriet Potter said, hoping he would understand why she was cutting their time together short. Okay, I'll walk you back in. Draco bent down and picked up the rose box and handed it to Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter placed the rose back in the box and walked alongside Draco. She could tell Draco was a little upset even though he was trying to hide it. She didn't want to leave him like that, so Harriet Potter decided to try something. I'll race you to the doors, Harriet Potter exclaimed as she sprinted away laughing. Draco stood there for a second, giving Harriet Potter a head start. He then sprinted after her, knowing he could catch her easily. He smiled at Harriet Potter as he ran past her. She grabbed his robe sleeve, trying to hold him back as they ran faster. Draco straightened his arm that Harriet Potter had a hold of and held her back by her shoulder. He touched the door first as they both slammed into it. They were both out of breath, laughing. You cheated! Draco laughed, pointing at Harriet Potter, still trying to catch his breath. So did you? Harriet Potter smiled, pointing back at him, bent over trying to catch her breath too. They both stood there for a few minutes until they were breathing normal again. They walked inside and headed for the water fountain. Draco let Harriet Potter drink first. She stood up and wiped her mouth. Draco took a drink from the fountain as Harriet Potter waited for him. Could you do me a favor, Draco? Harriet Potter asked, smoothing her hair back and tightening her ponytail. Anything you want, Draco replied, watching her. Could you take the fire rose with you? I don't want to take it with me to the hospital and risk something happening to it, she said, holding out the box to him. Draco took the box from Harriet Potter and put it in his robe. How long are you going to be at the hospital? Draco inquired. About 2 hours, not long. Why you gonna miss me? Harriet Potter looked up at him and smiled. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Draco shrugged his shoulders, using her own words against her. You think you are so clever using my own words against me, she said, smiling and hitting him on his arm. I do think I'm clever, but yes, I will miss you, Draco admitted. Harriet Potter was so happy to hear Draco say he would miss her. How about you come get me in 2 hours from the hospital? Harriet Potter requested, beaming at Draco. I'll be there. Draco winked at her. Okay, I'll see you later then, bye. Harriet Potter waved as she walked away. Bye. Draco watched Harriet Potter walk away. He stood there until she turned the corner. He proceeded to the common room, thinking about Harriet Potter. He missed her already. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Authors. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy, Chapter 7. Harriet Potter entered the hospital. She could see that a few more beds were empty since the last time she was there. Most of the students were awake, so it wasn't as quiet as before. Harriet Potter scanned the room for Madame Pomfrey. She saw her administering medicine to a student. As Harriet Potter headed towards her, she passed by Harry Potter's bed. He was talking to a red-headed boy that was seated in a chair next to his bed. Harry noticed Harriet Potter walking by. He looked at her and smiled. Harriet Potter saw him and smiled back and continued walking to Madame Pomfrey. Hello, Madame Pomfrey. I would like to help if you need me, Harriet Potter requested with a smile. Yes, that would be helpful. Take water to the students just as you did before, Madame Pomfrey instructed. Harriet Potter collected the cart and put several pitchers of cool water onto it. She made her way to the first bed where a first-year Slytherin boy had been earlier. The bed was now empty, which meant he was well enough to leave. In the next bed was a Slytherin girl. She was sitting up playing with a dragon model that was flying around her hand. "Hi, Madame Pomfrey would like you to drink a full glass of water," Harriet Potter instructed her while handing her a glass of water. "Thanks," the girl replied as she took the glass and drank. "You're welcome," Harriet Potter replied as she moved onto the next bed. It was empty, but the one after that wasn't. It was occupied with the Gryffindor boy who had smacked the glass out of her hand. "Oh great," she thought as she approached. Harriet Potter avoided looking at the Gryffindor boy and refilled his pitcher. She poured a glass of water but left it on his table next to the bed. "Drink it," she said as she walked away. She saw the Gryffindor boy grab the glass and drink the water with a mad look on his face. Harriet Potter noticed that the Gryffindor girl who had been in the next bed was no longer there. She was glad about that, one less confrontation. The next bed was still empty. She was about to approach Harry's bed when she heard a student on the other side of the room calling for water. Harriet Potter quickly went to the Ravenclaw boy. He was coughing hard and holding his hand out. She gave him a glass of water and he hurriedly drank it to calm his cough. "Thanks," he said after he finished drinking it all. "Would you like some more?" Harriet Potter offered, seeing how thirsty he was. He nodded and Harriet Potter poured him another glass. He took the glass and smiled at her. She smiled back, then refilled his pitcher. She decided to continue on to the next bed from where she was until she made her way back to where she left off. There were Hufflepuff twin brothers in the next beds who were both sleeping. Harriet Potter refilled their pitchers and poured them both glasses of water. She woke them up one at a time and had them drink. She continued on to the next bed, and the next, refilling pitchers and getting students to drink the glasses of water. She made her way back to Harry's bed. "Hi, Harriet Potter," Harry said, smiling and sitting up. "Hello, Harry. How are you feeling? You look like you're doing a lot better," Harriet Potter remarked as she refilled his pitcher and poured him a glass of water. "Loads better. Madame Pomfrey said I could leave in the morning," he replied, taking the glass from Harriet Potter and drinking the water. Harriet Potter looked at the red-headed boy sitting quietly in the chair. She smiled at him and he smiled back. Harry saw them looking at each other. "Oh, Harriet Potter, this is Ron Weasley. Ron, this is Harriet Potter L/N. Harry quickly introduced them to each other. "Hi, nice to meet you," Harriet Potter said, holding out her hand to him. Ron sat there for a few seconds staring at Harriet Potter. He thought she was very pretty. He felt his face heat up a little, then he slowly reached for Harriet Potter's hand. Harriet Potter smiled, seeing his reaction to her. Nice to meet you," Ron replied, slowly shaking Harriet Potter's hand. Harriet Potter giggled and let go of his hand. She went back to the water cart and pushed it as she started walking away. "Harriet Potter, could you come back after you're done? If you have time," Harry asked, stopping her. "Sure, I'm almost done," she said happily. "Good eye. Would like to talk to you some more," he said, smiling at her as she started walking away again. "Who would have thought a Slytherin girl could be so nice?" Ron said to Harry after Harriet Potter was far enough away but still looking at her. "Yeah, and pretty too," Harry replied, watching Ron's reaction, taking notice of how he acted earlier towards Harriet Potter. "She is," Ron said, still staring at Harriet Potter with a smile on his face. Harry snapped his fingers in front of Ron's face, trying to break his stare on Harriet Potter. Ron blinked and looked at Harry. Harry laughed at Ron, who looked a little embarrassed. "Yeah, well, we can both forget about getting with her," Ron remarked. "Maybe you can," Harry joked as Ron rolled his eyes. "I heard she's with Malfoy," Ron whispered, sounding disappointed. "She told me they were friends," Harry stated, wondering if what Ron said was true. Ron shrugged his shoulders, not knowing which was true. Harriet Potter finished putting away the glasses and pitchers of water. Madame Pomfrey informed Harriet Potter that there was nothing more for her to do tonight. Most of the students were asleep now, and the ones that were still awake were quietly talking or reading. Harriet Potter made her way over to Harry and Ron. "I'm done for tonight," she said as she sat at the foot of Harry's bed. "Good, we didn't get to talk much earlier," Harry replied, smiling at her. "So where's Hermione? Isn't she usually with you too?" Harriet Potter asked, looking at them both. Harry and Ron looked at each other, surprised that Harriet Potter knew Hermione. "You know Hermione?" Harry asked Harriet Potter curiously. "Yes, she spends a lot of time in the library, so do I. so I thought why not study with her since we are both the top students in our houses. We study together once, sometimes twice a week. Other than that we don't really socialize outside of the library, Harriet Potter explained to them. Hermione was here earlier, Harry answered. She's probably at the library right now, Ron suggested. Yeah, whenever we're looking for her, that's the first place we go, Harry said, looking at Ron. Ron nodded in agreement. So you're the top student in Slytherin? Harry asked, trying to make the conversation about Harriet Potter. Yes, I love learning, so I do a lot of studying and reading, Harriet Potter said, enthusiastically looking from Harry to Ron. Sounds like you should have been put in Ravenclaw instead of Slytherin, Harry stated. Well, the Sorting Hat was going to put me in Ravenclaw, but I asked it to put me in Slytherin, Harriet Potter said, waiting for their reaction. She knew anyone outside of Slytherin would think she was crazy to ask the Sorting Hat to put her in Slytherin. I'm not trying to offend you, but why would you ask to be put in Slytherin? Harry asked, trying to be polite. Well, when I was on the train to Hogwarts my first year, I was alone. I didn't know anyone. I was sitting by myself when Millicent Bulstrode came and sat with me. We talked and laughed the whole way to Hogwarts and became friends. So when it came time for the Sorting Hat, Millicent was put into Slytherin and I didn't want to separate from my first friend here, so I asked the Sorting Hat to put me in Slytherin too, Harriet Potter explained. Sounds like me and Ron. I met Ron my first year on the way to Hogwarts too, Harry said, understanding why Harriet Potter asked to be put in Slytherin. Yeah, getting to Hogwarts our first year was easy compared to our second year. Wouldn't you say, Harry? Ron laughed as he looked at Harry, remembering all the trouble they had. Harry laughed back at Ron, thinking about how they got to Hogwarts that year. What's so funny? What happened? Harriet Potter asked, watching them both laugh. Harry explained to Harriet Potter everything that happened with the Weasleys' flying car, the Whomping Willow, and almost being expelled. All three of them were now laughing. They continued talking and laughing with each other. They talked about their professors, which ones they liked and didn't like. They spoke about their favorite spells. Ron and Harry told Harriet Potter how much they enjoyed Quidditch. I love flying on my broomstick, Harriet Potter told them. We should all go flying soon, Harry suggested, mostly to Harriet Potter but including Ron. Yeah, that could be fun, Harriet Potter agreed, smiling at them. Harriet Potter looked at Ron and noticed that his face had become very red. Are you all right, Ron? Your face looks really red, Harriet Potter asked Ron, suddenly concerned about him. Your face does look red, Ron, Harry stated, also worried about Ron. I am feeling a little hot, Ron said, starting to wonder what was going. Harriet Potter stood up and went to Ron. Ron became nervous when Harriet Potter approached him. She placed the back of her hand on his cheek, then his forehead. Ron sat still, looking up at Harriet Potter, enjoying her touch even though he was starting to feel worse. You're burning up. I think Madame Pomfrey should take a look at you, Harriet Potter said, then walked away to get her. Her hand is so soft, Ron said to Harry as he touched his cheek. Harry shook his head and laughed at Ron, who was slowly starting to become infatuated with Harriet Potter. Draco had been secretly watching Harriet Potter with Harry and Ron. He saw her talking and laughing with them. He wanted them to stop talking to her. He then saw Harriet Potter get up and touch Ron's face. He could see the enjoyment in Ron's face. Draco became angry and quickly walked in, heading towards Harry and Ron. Harriet Potter left to get Madame Pomfrey and didn't notice Draco walk in. Here comes trouble, Ron said to Harry when he noticed Draco walking angrily towards them. Harry turned to see what Ron was talking about. Harry rolled his eyes when he saw that it was Draco Malfoy. What does he want? Harry said, not wanting to deal with Draco. Draco stopped at the foot of Harry's bed, looking angry. He looked to see if Harriet Potter noticed him there. She was still talking to Madame Pomfrey and hadn't seen him. Stay away from her, Draco commanded, standing there with his fist clenched, looking from Harry to Ron. From who? Harry asked, pretending to not know who Draco was talking about just to irritate him. Ron shrugged his shoulders and looked to Harry, also pretending. You know very well who I'm talking about, Potter, Draco stated, growing more angry. Harry crossed his arms and glared at Draco, seeing how angry and irritated he was getting with him. No, I don't think I will stay away from her, Harry replied. Draco wanted to pull out his wand and attack Harry, but he resisted. He knew Harriet Potter would never forgive him if he did. Harriet Potter heard raised voices as she was informing Madame Pomfrey about Ron. She saw Draco standing by Harry's bed. They were arguing with each other. Madame Pomfrey heard them as well. Harriet Potter followed Madame Pomfrey as she headed towards Draco and Harry. "Mr. Malfoy, you need to leave, and you Mr. Potter need to sleep, or I will not be releasing you in the morning," Madame Pomfrey demanded. "Yes, Madame Pomfrey," Harry said as he pulled the covers onto him. Madame Pomfrey asked Ron to sit on the bed next to Harry so she could examine him. Draco glared at Harry before he walked away. Draco grabbed Harriet Potter's hand and pulled her aside so Harry couldn't hear them. "Are you ready to go?" Draco asked, rubbing her hand with his thumb. "I just need a few more minutes," Harriet Potter answered, squeezing Draco's hand gently, not wanting him to feel hurt that she didn't leave with him right then. "I'll wait for you in the hall," Draco replied, trying not to sound disappointed. Harriet Potter nodded and went back to Madame Pomfrey and Ron. Madame Pomfrey finished examining Ron and said he contracted the sickness. He would need to stay in the hospital for the next 24 hours. Ron stayed in the bed next to Harry's. He was looking worse every minute that passed. Madame Pomfrey administered a potion drink to Ron, and he fell asleep immediately. "May I speak to Harry before I go, please?" Harriet Potter asked Madame Pomfrey. "Only for a moment, Miss L/N," Madame Pomfrey remarked as she grabbed the potion bottle and walked away. Harriet Potter looked at Ron, feeling sorry for him and what he was going to have to go through in the next 24 hours. She then faced Harry, glad that he would be released in the morning. "I should have asked Draco to wait for me in the hall to keep you two from arguing with each other," she said, feeling a little bit guilty about forgetting that they can't be in the same room with each other without a confrontation. "It's not your fault. That's just the way it's always been between us," Harry explained. Harriet Potter looked at Ron sleeping and saw that he was sweating. She grabbed a small towel to fold and pour cool water on. She then placed it on Ron's forehead to help cool him and maybe help him sleep better. "In the morning before you leave, could you tell Ron to make sure he drinks plenty of water so he won't become dehydrated?" she said, smiling at Harry. "Yeah, okay, I will," Harry smiled back. "Well, I'm going to let you get some sleep," Harriet Potter said as she walked away and waved goodbye. "Yeah, okay, talk to you later," Harry smiled and waved back. As Harry laid there, he thought about Harriet Potter. He thought she was the most considerate person he ever met. The way she put a towel on Ron's head to make him more comfortable as he slept, asking him to make sure Ron drank enough water. Also, Harriet Potter was smart like Hermione, and she was really pretty. He was a little bit glad he became sick, otherwise he might not have ever met her. Harriet Potter was definitely the kind of person he wanted to be friends with. He was sure Draco would try to stop Harriet Potter from becoming his friend. Harry didn't understand why she would want to be friends with Draco. He could tell Draco wanted to be more than friends with her by the way he looked at her. Harry hoped Draco wouldn't get the opportunity to be Harriet Potter's boyfriend. Draco didn't deserve someone like Harriet Potter. Harry placed his glasses on the table next to him and closed his eyes. Harriet Potter quietly exited the hospital and saw Draco looking out a window while he waited for her. The moonlight shone on Draco's face, illuminating his handsome features. Harriet Potter never saw a more gorgeous face than Draco Malfoy's at this very moment. She felt butterflies in her stomach as she looked at him. He seemed to be in a deep thought and didn't hear Harriet Potter exit the hospital. After a minute, he turned away from the window and saw Harriet Potter staring at him. Draco smiled at Harriet Potter and walked to her. Harriet Potter felt a little embarrassed that Draco caught her staring at him. "I caught you thinking about me," Draco joked, pointing his finger at Harriet Potter. "You'll never know," Harriet Potter joked, pushing Draco on his shoulder and feeling her face blush. Draco noticed Harriet Potter's face blush, and he knew she was thinking about him. "Come on, let's go back to the common room," Harriet Potter said, tugging on Draco's robe. They entered the common room. Draco led Harriet Potter to a couch so he could be with her a little bit longer. Harriet Potter sat down facing Draco. They sat there for a minute, not saying anything, just smiling at each other. "What were you thinking about when you were looking out the window?" Harriet Potter asked, wondering if he was thinking about her. "I was thinking about you," Draco said, winking at Harriet Potter. "What were you thinking about me?" Harriet Potter asked, curious to know what Draco would say. "I thought about how much I like spending time with you," Draco answered. "I like spending time with you too," she said, grabbing his hand. Draco intertwined his fingers with hers and grinned. He was pleased to hear Harriet Potter say she liked spending time with him too. Harriet Potter wanted to sit there all night with Draco, but she was getting tired and could see Draco was too. "I think we should go to sleep now, Draco," she said, starting to stand up. Draco held onto her hand as he stood up with Harriet Potter. He kissed the underside of her wrist gently and let her hand go. Harriet Potter felt the butterflies again. "Good night, Draco," she said, then proceeded to her room. "Good night, Harriet Potter," Draco said, walking to his room. He lay down on his bed and fell asleep dreaming about Harriet Potter. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Authors. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy Chapter 8. Harriet Potter spent the next morning in the library. She skipped breakfast so she could study. Harriet Potter loved to be in the library, and with her volunteering at the hospital wing she hadn't been there in a while. Madame Pomfrey managed to get the sickness under control, so there were only a few students who still had it. Harriet Potter was reading a book about flesh-eating trees of the world. She was fascinated with herbology. It was her favorite class. Learning about plants and their magical uses was very interesting to her. She enjoyed working with plants and was sure she would have a career in this field. It was almost time for lunch, and Harriet Potter decided not to skip it like she did breakfast. It was hard for her to stop studying, but she needed to eat. She closed her book and gathered her things. Harriet Potter noticed Hermione sitting and studying by herself. She stood up and went over to her. "Hi," Harriet Potter said as she sat down in front of Hermione. "Hello, Harriet Potter," Hermione said, looking up from her book at Harriet Potter. "How is Ron doing?" Harriet Potter asked, concerned about him. "He was sleeping when I saw him this morning, but Madame Pomfrey informed me he was doing a lot better. Harry was there. He told me that he and Ron met you when Harry was sick," Hermione replied, closing her book. "Harry was really nice to me, so was Ron. They are so funny and fun to be around." "I can see why you're with them so much," Harriet Potter said, smiling. "They are really great, but they also get into a lot of trouble," Hermione replied, smiling back at Harriet Potter, informing her. Draco came into the library looking for Harriet Potter, not having seen her this morning. He knew she didn't have breakfast because he waited for her in the Great Hall all morning. Draco wanted to have lunch with her, so he went to find her in the library, where he knew she liked spending time. He finally spotted her sitting with Hermione Granger. He had to control his attitude when approaching Harriet Potter while she was sitting with Hermione. It was going to be hard for him not to make a face at Hermione because he disliked her so much, almost as much as Harry. He took a deep breath and walked over to Harriet Potter. Hermione noticed Draco walking towards them. Harry told her about Harriet Potter and Draco, and she figured he was coming to talk to her. Hermione got up suddenly from the table, gathering her things. "I'll see you later, Harriet Potter," Hermione said, motioning in Draco's direction. Harriet Potter turned to look at what Hermione was motioning to. She saw Draco and understood why Hermione was in such a hurry to leave. "All right, see you later," Harriet Potter said as Hermione walked away. Hermione walked right past Draco, expecting him to say something mean to her. Draco just kept walking past Hermione, not even looking at her. Hermione was shocked. It was the first time he didn't say anything cruel or look at her disgusted. Hermione figured it had to be because of Harriet Potter. She must be having some sort of effect on him. Draco continued walking towards Harriet Potter. She turned to look at Draco and smiled at him. "Hello, beautiful," Draco said as he stroked down the back of Harriet Potter's head, then sitting down next to her. Harriet Potter could feel a slight blush on her cheeks from Draco calling her beautiful. She liked when he complimented her.
DRACO.
"What are you doing in here?" "You're never in here," Harriet Potter asked, facing Draco. "I was looking for you. You weren't at breakfast, and I wanted to see if you would come with me to lunch," Draco answered, brushing Harriet Potter's hair off her shoulder. She could feel herself becoming weak to his touch. Harriet Potter would have a pleasant reaction whenever he touched her. "I might be willing to do that," Harriet Potter said, shivering with goosebumps as Draco touched her hair. "Good, because I really want you to." Draco licked his lips, smiling at her. "Okay, let me put this book back," she said, pushing her chair away from the table. "Let me do it," Draco said, grabbing the book away from her. "All right, I'll wait here for you," Harriet Potter replied, watching Draco as he walked away. As Harriet Potter waited, she thought about when they first met. It was there in the library. Draco acted so differently then. He wasn't as kind as he is now with her. She wondered if Draco remembered when they met. Draco looked at Harriet Potter as she sat there waiting for him. She looked like she was daydreaming. He wanted her to be daydreaming about him. He daydreamed about her constantly, mostly about her saying yes, that she would be his girlfriend. Thinking about me again? Draco asked, tapping her shoulder. She jumped a little, unaware of Draco's presence. He sat down next to her, laughing slightly, seeing her jump. Yes, I was thinking about the first time we met. Do you remember? She asked. I remember. It was here in the library. You couldn't take your eyes off me. Draco joked, nudging her. More like I couldn't take my eyes off my book until you came and bothered me by snatching it out of my hands. She corrected him with a playful look on her face. I couldn't help myself. You look so lovely. I wanted you to pay attention to me, not the book. Draco remarked, smiling at her and scooting his chair closer. Was offering to share the book with me another way of getting my attention? Harriet Potter asked, thinking about how he playfully refused to give her the book back that day. Yes, and asking you to help me with my essay. He answered, remembering how nice she was to him, even though she clearly wanted to be left alone. So all those times you asked for my help with your work, you were just trying to get my attention? She asked, now realizing what he had been doing. Yes, I wanted to be near you, Draco admitted, putting his hand on Harriet Potter's back. That's so sweet. I know you probably don't think of yourself that way, but you are to me, she said, putting her hand on the side of his face. Draco was amazed by the way she made him feel. He wanted to feel this way always. He never thought he would find someone like her. You make me that way, he said, stroking Harriet Potter's back. See, sweet, just like I said. Harriet Potter joked with him, pinching his cheek playfully. Draco laughed, then stood up. Come on, let's go eat, he said, holding his hand out to help her stand up. Yes, I'm so hungry, she replied, grabbing Draco's hand to stand up. Draco then offered to carry Harriet Potter's things for her. They left the library and headed to the Great Hall. There were a crowd of students gathered at the entrance, slowly going in. Draco kept his hand on Harriet Potter's shoulder, so they wouldn't be separated. Harry noticed Draco just ahead of him. He could see that he had his hand on Harriet Potter's shoulder. Harry pushed his way through the crowd to get to her. He didn't care that Draco was with her. He wasn't going to let that stop him from talking to her. Hello, Harriet Potter, Harry said, squeezing next to her and smiling. She turned to see who was talking to her. When she saw that it was Harry, she was happy but worried how Draco would react to him. Hi, Harry, she said, smiling back at him. They continued to push through the crowd. She could feel Draco steering them away from Harry. She didn't want them to have another confrontation, so she didn't resist. Harry continued following Harriet Potter, even though he could clearly see Draco trying to steer her away from him. Ron's doing a lot better, should be released tomorrow morning, Harry said, trying to stay next to her. Hermione told me earlier that he was better, she replied, feeling Draco pull her closer to him. They were finally able to enter the Great Hall. Draco and Harriet Potter headed towards the Slytherin table, with Harry still following them. Harriet Potter, can I speak to you for a moment? Harry asked, stopping her. Draco, could you give me a minute? She asked, turning to Draco and smiling, not wanting him to be upset. Draco nodded, then weakly smiled at her, trying to control his anger towards Harry. Draco waited for Harriet Potter a few steps away, not wanting to leave her with Harry. I'm going to visit Ron later after dinner. Would you like to come with me? Harry asked, smiling at her. I'm not sure if I will have time to. I'll let you know, Harriet Potter said politely. Okay. Harry nodded, then walked away, disappointed that she didn't say she would go with him. Harriet Potter felt bad seeing Harry walk away disappointed, but she wasn't sure if she would have time to go. She wanted to spend more time in the library studying. She also thought about spending some time with Draco. She turned back to Draco and they walked to the Slytherin table to eat. Draco let her sit down first, then he sat next to her. He was secretly happy that Harriet Potter didn't say she would go with Harry. Harriet Potter looked over the table, trying to decide what to eat. She decided on some spaghetti and meatballs. She poured herself some water. Draco had already poured himself some pumpkin juice, so she didn't offer him any water. She noticed that he was eating the spaghetti too. Draco watched her eat the spaghetti. He thought it so funny how the noodles smacked her face when she slurped them into her mouth. He smiled, seeing spaghetti sauce splattered lightly around her mouth. Harriet Potter noticed Draco looking at her eat. "What's so funny?" she asked, turning to Draco, who had a big grin on his face. "You and the way you slurp spaghetti," Draco replied, grabbing his napkin and wiping the spaghetti sauce off her face. "Well, maybe I purposely slurped the noodles to get your attention." She smiled at him while he continued to wipe her mouth. "I'll give you my attention any time you want it," he said, winking at her and putting the napkin down. Draco could see out of the corner of his eye Harry looking at them. He was glad Harry could see Harriet Potter enjoying herself with him. Harry looked over at Harriet Potter and saw Draco and her smiling at each other. He then saw Draco wipe her mouth. Harry rolled his eyes, unable to believe how she was falling for Draco's charms. "What's the matter, Harry?" Hermione said, noticing him make a face. "Nothing, just Draco and Harriet Potter." "How can she not see how horrible he is?" Harry asked Hermione, still staring at them. "She obviously sees something we don't." Hermione tried to explain, not understanding herself why Harriet Potter would be friends with Draco Malfoy. "Maybe," Harry said, unconvinced. Draco and Harriet Potter continued to eat their lunch. Draco saw Harry get up to leave and looked at him angrily. Harry looked back at Draco with the same look. Harriet Potter didn't notice them looking angrily at each other. She was too busy cleaning up her area. When Draco was done, she cleaned his area as well. Draco sat there watching her clean and didn't say anything about it. Students started leaving once they were done with lunch. Draco and Harriet Potter stayed at the table talking to each other until only a few students remained in the Great Hall. Owls started to fly into the Great Hall, delivering packages to students. An owl flew over Draco and dropped a box in front of him. "It's from Mum," he said, unwrapping the box and looking inside it. Draco pulled out a mixture of candy boxes and bags. "She always sends me candy for Halloween," he said, sorting through the candy looking for a particular box. Harriet Potter hadn't realized until now that Halloween was tomorrow. Was her favorite holiday. She loved the way Hogwarts celebrated it with an evening feast, and the decorations were so beautiful. Now she was so excited for tomorrow. Draco found the box he was looking for. It was a black box wrapped with orange ribbons. He had his mother send it to him specifically for Harriet Potter. "Box, I got these for you," Draco said, smiling at her and handing her the. "Draco, what did I tell you about buying me gifts?" she asked, not taking the box. "It's not expensive. It's just something I know you like," he said, forcing the box into her hand. "Okay, thank you," she replied, taking the box. Draco smiled as he watched her open the box, hoping that she liked the gift. Harriet Potter opened the beautifully wrapped box. Inside were a dozen white chocolate frogs bouncing in their boxes. "White chocolate frogs are my favorite candy." "How did you know?" she asked Draco, happily smiling at him and wondering how he found out. "A little birdie told me," Draco joked, not wanting to tell her that he had one of the Slytherin girls ask Millicent, but telling them not to say it was for him. Harriet Potter opened one of the frogs and held it down in her hand with her finger. She always thought they were so cute. "Open your mouth," she asked Draco, holding her hand with the frog in it up to his mouth. "What? Why?" He laughed at her. "I want to see if I can get it to jump in your mouth." She smiled at him, gesturing for him to do it. "All right, only because you're so irresistible," he said, licking his lips and opening his mouth. Harriet Potter let go of the frog and it jumped out of her hand. It hit Draco right in the eye, then hopped away. Draco covered his eye with his hand. "I'm so sorry, Draco," she said, immediately putting her hand over his hand that was on his eye. "I'll be fine. Don't worry about it," he said, rubbing his eye, not wanting her to be upset. "Come on, let's go splash some water in your eye," she said, pulling on his arm and getting up. Draco stood up and followed her out of the Great Hall. They headed for the nearest water fountain. Draco bent over the fountain, turning on the water. "Let me do it, please," Harriet Potter said, feeling guilty and grabbing a handful of water and putting it up to Draco's eye. She splashed his eye with the water a few times, then used her robe to pat it dry. Draco enjoyed her being so caring towards him. He blinked his eye a few times and wiped it. "How does it feel? Does it hurt?" she asked, concerned, patting around his eye socket. "A little, maybe you should kiss it better," Draco smiled, taking advantage of the situation, hoping she wouldn't get mad at his suggestion. Harriet Potter felt relieved when Draco flirted with her to kiss his eye. She was glad he wasn't hurt. "Maybe I will. Only because you're so irresistible," she flirted back with him. Draco stepped closer to her, putting his hand on her hips. Harriet Potter could feel butterflies in her stomach when he put his hands on her. She grabbed his face with her hands and pulled him down to her. She slowly inched her face closer to Draco's. He could feel his heart pounding hard in his chest. Draco wanted so much to kiss her lips but resisted. He closed his eye and felt her gently place her lips on it. Harriet Potter held her lips to his eye for a moment before releasing a kiss on it. She pulled back and looked into Draco's eyes, still holding onto his face. He looked at her and smiled, feeling so happy. "How about later we talk about us?" she said, smiling back at him. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Authors: The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Chapter 9. Draco walked away from Harriet Potter, overjoyed at her last remark to him. He touched his eye where she left a kiss. A huge smile formed on his face. It was so unlike him to be so happy about a kiss. A kiss that was not even on his lips. Draco continued walking, unable to think about anything else. Harriet Potter opened the door to her dormitory room. Millicent's cat brushed up against her leg, then ran out the door before she closed it. She closed the door quietly, noticing that Millicent was taking a nap. She hoped that she would be able to talk to Millicent, but she would have to wait. Harriet Potter walked over to her fire rose that was in a slender crystal vase next to her bed. She observed that the petals were wilting, and it would need to be renewed soon with fire. She loved the way it made their room smell like cinnamon. Millicent made a remark when she first brought it to the room about not liking the smell, but she saw how much Harriet Potter loved the flower and didn't mention it again. She set down her box of white chocolate frogs next to the vase. She sat down on her bed and reached for her pillow. She lifted it up to see that her note from Draco was still there. She smiled when she saw it, thinking of the sweet words that were written on it. Harriet Potter put the pillow back down, hearing Millicent moving around in her bed. "Hey," Millicent said, sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "Hey," she said back, still smiling. "What are you smiling about?" "No, wait, let me guess. Draco," she remarked, rolling her eyes. "Yeah, he's so sweet to me." Harriet Potter replied, smiling even bigger as she looked at the box of white chocolate frogs. "Draco sweet? Never," Millicent said, crossing her arms and raising her eyebrow at Harriet Potter. "He is. You just don't know him like I do," she said, trying to convince her friend. "So what's happened between you two now?" she said, guessing that Harriet Potter wanted to talk about him. Millicent didn't mind too much. Harriet Potter was her best friend, and she knew that Draco and her were getting closer. Even though Millicent didn't like Draco, she would listen to her talk about him and try not to be too harsh with her remarks. "Well, I kissed him. Sort of," she said, tilting her head slightly. "You didn't?" "Wait, what do you mean by sort of?" Millicent asked, curiously. Harriet Potter explained everything that happened earlier with Draco. She told her about how sweet he was when he wiped her mouth. Also how he gave her a box of her favorite candy. Millicent now knew the real reason why that Slytherin girl asked her about Harriet Potter's favorite candy. This wasn't for a research poll. It was for Draco. Next time she wouldn't be so forthcoming with her answers. She did not want to help Draco again. They both laughed when she told Millicent about the frog missing Draco's mouth and hitting his eye. Then she told her how relieved she was that his eye wasn't damaged. Then he said I should kiss it better. So I did. I kissed his eye, she said, smiling. I bet Draco was disappointed it was on his eye. Millicent responded, happy with her friend for not giving him what he really wanted. He didn't look disappointed. He actually looked happy, she replied, thinking back on Draco's reaction. Draco happy? Millicent asked skeptically. Yes, but it could also be because I told him we could talk about us later, she said, waiting for her friend's reaction. Does this mean you're actually considering becoming his girlfriend? Millicent asked, a little disappointed. It just means that I'm willing to talk about it now. I wanted us to be really good friends first, and now we are. There are things I need to discuss with him beforehand, she answered, trying to reassure her friend. Anyways, enough about me. What is going on with you? Harriet Potter asked, not having spent much time with her and genuinely wanting to know. Millicent talked about how her and some of the Slytherin girls were being pranked by the boys. Millicent admitted she had only been pranked once, after she punched one of the boys in the face for putting spiders in her hair. They have a lot of time on their hands with no classes today or tomorrow. It's only going to get worse with Halloween tomorrow. Not that she have to worry about being pranked, she said, standing up to stretch her legs. Why do you say that? Harriet Potter asked, wondering what she meant. You're protected because of Draco. No one would dare mess with you, she replied, looking around for her boots. Harriet Potter didn't respond. She knew that Millicent was right. Millicent found her boots and put them on. She ran a brush quickly through her hair and adjusted her shirt collar. She picked her robe up off the bed and pulled out a letter. I got to go to the Ollery. I'll see you later, Millicent said, exiting the room. Harriet Potter waved goodbye to her and then reached into her robe pocket and pulled out her wand. She stood up and went to her fire rose. She placed the tip of her wand on it. Incendio, she said, pulling her wand away once the rose caught fire. The fire extinguished and a beautiful orange and red rose blossomed with a strong scent of cinnamon. She closed her eyes and inhaled the scent with a smile on her face. She pictured Draco's happy face from earlier for a moment, then opened her eyes. She put her wand back into her robe and walked over to the desk. Grabbing a small piece of parchment and dipping the quill into the ink, she quickly wrote a note. It was to Draco, asking him to meet her by the Black Lake an hour before dinner. She folded up the note, grabbed her bag, and headed down to the common room. Upon entering the common room, she saw Crab and Goyle sitting on a couch, hovering over a pile of candy that was in between them. They were unwrapping pieces and shoving them into their mouths. She proceeded towards them. They didn't notice her standing there. Excuse me, she said, trying to get their attention. Crab and Goyle looked up at her with nervous expressions. Do either one of you know where Draco is? She asked politely. Crab and Goyle looked at each other, each wanting the other to answer her. Crab gave in and raised his hand slightly. Could you give this note to him, please? She smiled and held out the note to Crab. Crab nodded his head and took the note from Harriet Potter. Thank you, Vincent, she said, waving to them both and leaving the common room. Crab and Goyle quickly stood up and ran to find Draco to deliver the note to him. Harriet Potter walked out of the castle and headed towards Hagrid's hut. As she approached Hagrid's hut, she could see that he was outside moving pumpkins. She also spotted Harry sitting on the front doorsteps. He was holding a broom and running a cloth along it to polish it. She finally reached the hut, a little out of breath. Hello, Hagrid. She smiled up at him. Harry instantly looked up when he heard Harriet Potter's voice. He wanted to go over to her but decided not to interrupt her and Hagrid. Hello, Harriet Potter. Come for your pumpkin, have ya? Hagrid said, moving a gigantic pumpkin onto a cart. Yes, I have. Would I be able to get 2 from you this year? She asked, hoping he could spare another one. I can give you 2. I have plenty, he said, smiling down at her. Thank you so much, Hagrid, she replied, watching him place another pumpkin into the cart. I'll get them for ya, Hagrid said, walking around to the back of his house. Harry heard Hagrid walk away from Harriet Potter. He placed his broom up against Hagrid's hut as he stood up. He placed the cloth in his pocket and walked over to her. Hi, Harriet Potter, he said, smiling at her. Hello, Harry, she said, smiling back at him. So you've come to get pumpkins from Hagrid? Harry asked, stepping closer to her. Yes, they are my favorite part of Halloween, she answered, touching one of the gigantic pumpkins in the cart. I like the evening feast, he said, rubbing his belly and chuckling. Ha ha, she said, rolling her eyes but still smiling. Hagrid returned, holding 2 small pumpkins. Here you go, he said, handing her the 2 perfectly shaped bright orange pumpkins. Oh, they are so pretty. Thank you, she remarked excitedly, grabbing them. She was having trouble holding the 2 pumpkins. They were a little too heavy to carry together. Let me help you carry one, Harry offered, grabbing the larger of the 2. That's nice of you, but I'm going all the way to the Black Lake with them. So I'll use a levitation charm to carry them, she said, not wanting to take up his time. It's not a problem. Hey, I can give you a ride on my broom over there so you don't have to walk all that way, he said, running to get his broom. I don't mind walking, she replied politely. Come on, it will be fun, he said, making his broom hover. Okay, she said, trying to be considerate of his feelings. She sat on the back of the broom, cradling one of the pumpkins. Harry sat in front of her, cradling the other pumpkin and grabbing the front of the broom. Harriet Potter placed her other hand lightly on his shoulder. Goodbye, Hagrid, she said, smiling at him. Goodbye, Harry said. Hagrid waved at them both, smiling brightly. "Are you ready?" Harry asked, looking back at Harriet Potter with a big smile on his face. "Yes, but don't go too fast. I don't want a pumpkin to fall," she replied, holding the pumpkin tighter. Harry kicked off and they both went up. Harry felt Harriet Potter squeeze his shoulder as they went up higher. He was glad to have her sitting with him on his broom. He slowed down a little to keep from getting there so quickly. Harriet Potter's hair was blowing over her face. She shook her head, trying to make it move. She forgot to pull it back before getting on the broom. Her hair was getting in her mouth and she needed to move it. She let go of Harry and quickly pushed her hair off her face. She became unbalanced and wrapped her arm around Harry's neck to keep from falling. Luckily, she didn't drop the pumpkin. Harry was surprised when she wrapped her arm around his neck. He turned back and smiled at her. "Right here is fine, Harry," she shouted, seeing the lake. Harry nodded and began to descend where she wanted to go. Draco wanted to be with Harriet Potter and decided to meet her early. He exited the castle and headed to the lake. He was almost to the lake when he saw Harry and Harriet Potter landing. He was upset seeing her with Harry. He walked faster, becoming angry as he watched Harry with her. Harry got off the broom when they landed and grabbed the other pumpkin from her. She stepped off the broom and gently laid it on the floor. "You can put them down anywhere," she told Harry. "All right," he said, placing them on the ground. "Sorry if I choked you when I grabbed onto you," she said, pointing to his neck. "I didn't feel a thing," he said jokingly while he rubbed his neck. Harriet Potter saw Draco approaching. She could see that he was angry. She quickly ran to Draco before he could get any closer to Harry. "You're early," she said, standing in front of him, smiling, trying to get his attention off of Harry. "What's he doing here?" he asked, glaring at Harry, not even looking at her. She touched his face and grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. Draco broke his glare from Harry and looked at Harriet Potter when he felt her touch him. His anger faded away when he saw her smiling up at him. "He was just helping me carry pumpkins from Hagrid's. He's not staying. It's just going to be she and me. Wait here, okay?" she said, squeezing his hand. "Okay," he answered, grinning at her. She walked back to Harry. He was standing there with his broom in his hand, glaring back at Draco. He smiled at Harriet Potter when she got closer. "Thank you for the help, Harry," she said, smoothing down her hair. "Anytime," he replied, still smiling at her. "Well, I have plans with Draco, so I'll see you later," she said, trying to be nice. Harry nodded and got on his broom. He waved to her as he flew away. He was happy to have spent a little time with her. She waved back, relieved that she stopped a confrontation between the two of them. She looked back at Draco and waved him over to her. Draco rushed to her side. She sat down on the ground, grabbing one of the pumpkins. "Sit here," she said, patting the ground next to her. Draco sat down, scooting as close as he could to her. She handed him the pumpkin and then grabbed the other one. She placed that one on the ground in between her legs. Draco saw what she did and put his down between his legs. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small pocket knife. She opened the knife and stabbed into the top of the pumpkin. She cut out a large circle and pulled off the top. Draco sat there watching her. "Are you carving a jack-o'-lantern by hand?" Draco asked, wondering why she didn't use magic to make it. "Yes, it's fun." "Here, you try," she said, handing him the knife. Draco made a face, not believing Harriet Potter. He took the knife and stabbed the pumpkin, wanting to make her happy. He cut out a very crooked circle and was having trouble taking off the top. "You didn't cut deep enough," she said, leaning over, cutting the circle deeper. Draco pressed himself closer to her, looking over her head. She pulled on the pumpkin top, ripping it off and putting it on the ground. She sat back up in front of her pumpkin and pulled up her sleeves. She pulled out the Daily Prophet from her bag and opened it. She separated the sections and placed one in front of her pumpkin and handed the other one to Draco to do the same. "What's this for?" Draco asked, placing the paper in front of his pumpkin. "To put the pumpkin guts on." "Haven't you ever carved a pumpkin?" she asked, smiling at him. "Yes. Once, but with magic," Draco answered, smiling back at her. "Just watch me and do what I do," she said, reaching into the pumpkin. "What if I just watch you?" he said, looking her up and down in a flirtatious manner. "Maybe I'll let you later if you make a jack-o'-lantern," she answered, winking at him and laughing. She pulled out the guts and plopped them down on the paper. Draco pulled up his sleeves and did the same. He had a disgusted look on his face as he tried to shake it off his hands. They both continued until the pumpkins were empty. Now grab the knife and cut out eyes and a mouth, she told him, handing him a cloth to wipe his hands. Draco cleaned off his hands and cut 2 large jagged holes for eyes. He punched them out and cut a long rectangle for the mouth. He threw all the pieces onto the paper. He turned the pumpkin to face Harriet Potter so she could see what he carved. There, a jack-o'-lantern. It actually wasn't that hard, he said, admiring his work. It looks great, she said, holding in a laugh and taking the knife from him. Draco leaned closer to her and watched her carve into the pumpkin. He didn't see a pumpkin face forming. He didn't know what she was carving into the pumpkin. After about 10 minutes, he stopped looking at the pumpkin and stared at her face. He pulled hair off her face and placed it behind her ear. She smiled when she felt him do this but continued carving. After about half an hour, she was finished. Can you tell what it is? She said, turning the pumpkin towards Draco. It's fantastic, he answered, trying not to hurt her feelings but unable to tell what it was. This should make it easier for you to see it, she said as she pulled out her wand. Lumos, she said as she put the tip of her wand into the pumpkin. I can see it now. It's a dragon, he said, amazed that she was able to do that without a wand. Yes, like the meaning of your name, she replied happily. You did that for me? He asked, thinking that no one had ever done something like that for him. Just for you, she replied, smiling at him. The sun was starting to set. Harriet Potter realized it was almost time for dinner. She placed the top back on the pumpkin and gathered both papers with the pumpkin guts. She crumbled both papers into a ball and placed it near her bag. Draco put his top back on his pumpkin too. Come on, pick up your pumpkin and follow me, she said, lifting her pumpkin. Draco picked up his pumpkin and followed her. She walked towards the lake, then stopped when she was near it. Now what? He asked, curious about what they were going to do. Watch, she said, turning and smiling at him. She bent down with the pumpkin in both her hands and swung it hard, letting it go down the hill into the lake. It made a big splash, disturbing the water. She could see a couple of mermaid fins come out of the water and go back in. Why did you do that? Why didn't you keep it? Draco said, disappointed seeing the dragon pumpkin go into the lake. I like to see the big splash and I make a wish when it hits the water. No, it's childish, but I like to do it anyways. Besides, pumpkins rot quickly and start to smell, she said, explaining her actions. What did you wish for? Draco asked, nudging her with a grin on his face. Can't tell you. It won't come true if I do, she said, bumping him back. I won't tell you mine either. I definitely want my wish to come true, he said, winking at her. Harriet Potter could see that the mermaids were still swimming around the surface of the water. They didn't like when the water was disturbed. Draco took the pumpkin in one hand and forcefully tossed it down the hill. It bounced hard against the ground at the edge of the lake and flew up high in the air. They watched as it went up above the lake, came back down and hit a mermaid on her head as she dove in the water. Harriet Potter gasped and covered her mouth with her hands, looking at Draco. He looked stunned as he turned to look at her. They heard the mermaid screech loudly and looked back at her. She held the pumpkin up, then hurled it at Draco. It was coming incredibly fast. Draco only had a second to pull out his wand. A flash of light left his wand, hitting the pumpkin away from him and making it explode. He heard Harriet Potter squeal. She was standing there with her hands out, looking down at her clothes that were now covered in pumpkin chunks. Draco rushed over to her. He was so worried that she was going to be mad at him and never talk to him again. I'm so sorry, Harriet Potter. It was an accident. I'm sorry, he pleaded as he wiped her face with his robe sleeve. She looked up at Draco and started laughing hysterically. That mermaid was so mad at you. It looked so funny when the pumpkin hit her on the head, she said, having trouble getting the words out from laughing so much. Draco started laughing with her, feeling so much better. He couldn't believe that she was laughing instead of being mad at him. Any other girl would have walked off mad and never talked to him again. You're really great. You know that, he said, removing chunks of pumpkin from her hair. So are you. I will never forget this day, she said, laughing lightly. She wiped off as much pumpkin off her clothes as she could. She walked over to where her stuff was. She picked up the ball of paper with the pumpkin guts. Draco picked up the knife and put it in her bag. I'll carry your bag, he said, holding the straps in his hand. Thanks, she said, starting to walk to the castle. As they entered the castle and walked down the hall, students looked at her and laughed. Draco gave them a threatening look when he saw them. I don't care if they laugh. I know I look like a mess, she said to Draco to keep him from getting worked up over nothing. Even covered in pumpkin chunks, you're still more beautiful than anyone here, he said, smiling down at her. Harriet Potter felt a wave of heat come over her face. She smiled at him and kept smiling as they walked back to the common room. They entered the common room and she threw the paper ball in the trash. Draco handed her the bag. I'll wait for you, then we can go to dinner, he said to her. No, you go ahead and save me a plate of food. I'll try to be as quick as I can, she replied, wanting to make sure Draco was able to eat before there wasn't anything left. Okay, but hurry, Draco said, wanting to stay with her. I will, she replied, walking quickly to her room. He went to his room and changed into a clean robe. Draco left the common room and headed to the Great Hall. Harriet Potter took a shower hurriedly, but making sure to get out all the pumpkin from her hair. She put on her clothes and ran a brush through her hair. She ran out of her room and out of the common room. She rushed to the Great Hall. When she entered the hall, a lot of the students were already gone. She could see Draco still sitting there waiting for her. She waved to him and headed to the table. She sat down next to Draco, seeing that he had saved her a plate of food. Draco poured her some pumpkin juice. Thanks, she said, drinking the juice. Draco sat there watching her eat. He knew it made her uncomfortable, but he continued looking at her face. Since you made the jack-o'-lantern, I'll let you watch me eat, she said, smiling, then biting into her chicken leg. I'm going to enjoy every minute of it, he replied, moving closer to her. Are you sure you don't want to feed me the food too? She asked, giggling as he looked at her intensely. I'll do it, he replied, grabbing her spoon and scooping up some potatoes. Draco put the spoon up to her mouth, trying to feed her. They started laughing as she tried to keep her mouth closed. She moved her head side to side, pushing the spoon away. They continued laughing until Draco finally gave up and put the spoon down. Harriet Potter finished eating, wiped her mouth, and started to clean her area. Harry was sitting at the Gryffindor table waiting for Harriet Potter to finish eating. He wanted to talk to her even if Draco was around. He rose from the table when he saw her gathering her dishes. He went to the Slytherin table and sat down next to Harriet Potter. Hi, Harry said, startling her. Hi, she said, turning towards him. Draco controlled his reaction to Harry not wanting to ruin the fun he was having with Harriet Potter. He sat there quietly, scooting very close to her. She felt Draco move up against her. She didn't mind. She just didn't want any trouble between them. When he stayed quiet, she felt less worried about something happening. I'm going to visit Ron. Do you want to come with me? Harry asked, smiling and wondering why Draco hadn't said anything to him. Draco sat there clenching his fist under the table. I won't be able to go, she said in an apologetic manner. Draco smiled to himself and relaxed, unclenching his fist when he heard her answer. Okay, Harry said, disappointed. Tell Ron I'm sorry and I'm glad he's better, she requested, feeling bad for not going. I will, Harry said with a small smile as he stood up. Harry waved goodbye to her, then walked away. She waved back, then turned back to Draco. She smiled at him, surprised by his self-control around Harry this time. Let's go back to the common room so we can talk, she suggested. Draco nodded and stood up, holding his hand out to her. She grabbed his hand and pulled herself up. They made their way out of the Great Hall and back to the common room. They entered the common room and sat on one of the couches. Draco sat facing Harriet Potter with his back against the armrest. She sat with her legs crossed and her hands in her lap. She leaned her head back on the couch, turning it slightly to see him. What did you want to talk about? Draco asked. About us, she said nervously. I like that subject, Draco replied, smiling. I need to know how you feel about some things, and I want you to know some things about me, she said, feeling even more nervous having this conversation with him. I'll answer truthfully anything you ask me, he said, worried about how nervous she was getting. Well, first I need to know if you can handle me being friends with people you don't like, she stated, lifting her head off the couch. Honestly, it's not going to be easy, but I can handle it. Look how I controlled myself around Potter at dinner. It wasn't easy, but I did it for she, he replied, concerned about what she would think about his answer. I noticed how you didn't interact with him and just sat there. So I believe you when you say you can handle it, she said, feeling less nervous. You know, I study a lot and spend most of my time in the library. That is important to me. Will you have a problem with how much time I spend there? She asked, turning towards Draco. I don't want to disrupt your life in any way. I would like it if you made time for me too, Draco said, grabbing her hand. If we were together, I would make time for you, she replied, squeezing his hand and smiling. I know I've made you wait a long time for my decision, but I wanted to get to know you, she said, rubbing his fingers with her hand. Do you feel that you know me well enough to make a decision? Draco asked, hopeful. I think I do, she answered, smiling at him. Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter. Millicent came in, shouting, out of breath. Harriet Potter quickly turned her head. She let go of Draco's hand and stood up. Millicent saw her and came running over to where she was standing. What is it? What's the matter? She said, concerned about her friend. I can't find my cat. I've been searching for him all day. It's not like him to not come back to the room. I need you to help me find him, please, she replied, on the verge of tears. Okay, I'll help you. Don't worry, we'll find him, she said, trying to comfort her. Come on, let's go, Millicent said, not wanting to waste time. Draco, sorry, but I need to go, she said, waving bye to him as she exited the common room. Draco sat there, disappointed that she left. He was sure that she was ready to give him an answer. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Authors. The Persuasion of Draco Malfoy. Chapter 10. Harriet Potter and Millicent returned to the common room with only a few hours left for sleep. The cat was in the kitchens with the house elves. They were feeding him throughout the day. He was sleeping by a bowl of milk with a full belly. Millicent was so relieved when they found him. Harriet Potter was just glad they didn't get caught for being out past curfew. She was awakened by Millicent's cat meowing by the door. He wanted to be let out of the room. She peeked open her eyes and saw Millicent walking towards the cat. If I let you out, you better not make me go looking for you again, she said, picking up the cat and snuggling her face against his. The cat meowed as if it understood her. She opened the door and let him out. She sat down on her bed and began putting on her boots. She could see Harriet Potter with one eye half open. You're gonna miss breakfast if you don't get up, she said as she stood up. I'm not going. I want to sleep a little longer, maybe until lunch, she mumbled into her pillow. Okay, see you later, and thanks again for helping me, she said as she exited the room. When Millicent entered the common room, she saw Draco sitting by the common room door. He stood up when he spotted her. He moved in front of her when she came closer. She rolled her eyes and tried to walk past him. Wait a minute, Draco said as politely as he could manage to Millicent. She knew Draco only wanted information about Harriet Potter's whereabouts since she hadn't come down yet. She's sleeping till lunch, she said, sharply, moving past him and out of the common room. Draco glared at Millicent as she left. He blamed her for not being able to finish his conversation with Harriet Potter and for her still being asleep. He would now have to wait until later to talk to her. Harriet Potter stepped out of her room and continued to the common room. She saw Draco standing next to the fireplace with his back to her. She came up slowly behind him and squeezed the sides of his waist, making him jump. Ha ha! I scared you, she giggled, tapping him on his chest with her finger. You got me, he said, smiling at her, then stepping closer to her. She looked up at him and smiled. He put his hands gently on her waist. Her heart began to beat faster when he touched her. Do you want to be my girlfriend? He asked, rubbing her waist with his thumb. Yes, I want to be your girlfriend, she said, her face blushing brightly. She reached up and put her arms around Draco's neck. She tiptoed, bringing her face closer to his. She looked at his lips, then moved her lips closer to his. Draco pulled his face back away from hers. He grabbed her arms and pulled them off his neck. Draco, what's wrong? She said, looking upset. Nothing, everything is perfect. For me, he said, smirking at her, then walking away towards a crowd of students. She stood there confused about what just happened. Listen up, everyone, Draco said in a commanding voice. The crowd of students turned to Draco, becoming quiet. I got Harriet Potter L/N to say she wanted to be my girlfriend. So that means I pulled the biggest prank. I won, now pay up. he said, holding out his hand towards the students. She couldn't believe what just happened. She watched as several students went up to Draco handing him money. This whole time he was just trying to win and didn't really want to be with her. Tears began to fall down her face as she thought about how foolish she had been to trust him. You were right, Draco. You are the king of Halloween, Crabbe said as he handed him money. Harriet Potter fell to her hands and knees and began to cry uncontrollably. She felt as if someone punched her in the stomach. She could hear the students begin to chant his name. Draco! 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 They all shouted as he stood there with his arms crossed and a smug look on his face. Harriet Potter blinked her eyes open slowly. She was still in her bed. It was only a bad dream. Draco wasn't using her to win money. Placing her hand over her heart, she exhaled. She was so relieved it wasn't real. Since her first year at Hogwarts, Harriet Potter would wake up to a bad dream every Halloween morning. Her first year she dreamt that she was drowning in the Black Lake. She avoided the lake the rest of the school year. Last year she dreamt about touching a bubotuber and getting horribly painful boils all over her body. She still avoids going anywhere near one. This Halloween's dream was the worst for her because it was emotionally painful. She couldn't avoid Draco, nor did she want to. She would just have to forget about the dream and not let it affect her. She pushed away the thoughts about the dream and looked over to her clock. There was still some time before lunch. She rose out of bed and went to wash her face and brush her teeth. She changed out of her sleeping clothes and combed her hair. She sat down on the bed and put on her shoes. She thought about Draco and smiled to herself. She was so happy to have him in her life. She put on her robe and grabbed her wand. She left the room and went to the common room. There were a lot of students gathered around the room. Most of them were boys plotting their next prank. The common room looked a lot like her dream. She was glad that Draco wasn't standing next to the fireplace. She looked around but didn't see Draco or Millicent. She made her way through the room when she felt someone tap her shoulder. She turned around and saw a first year looking up at her. "Happy Halloween," he said, smiling and handing her a candy, then quickly walking away. "Thank you," she shouted to him, placing it in her robe pocket. She exited the common room and headed to the stairs. There were a few boys gathered near the stairs. She could hear them talking as she approached. "Not her," she heard one of them say. "Draco will curse you," she heard another one say. When she reached the staircase, the boys smiled at her while quickly putting whatever was in their hands behind their backs. They were trying to conceal what they had. She wondered what they were going to do to the next unsuspecting girl who went through them. She stepped off the staircase and walked down the hallway. The closer she got to the Great Hall, the more students there were. She could hear girls yelling and boys laughing. Most students were sitting or standing around waiting for lunch to begin. She maneuvered her way through the crowd when she was knocked down to the floor. A boy bumped into her as he tried to escape from an angry girl who was running after him. She felt someone grab onto her waist, lifting her up. "Are you all right, Harriet Potter?" she heard him ask as he helped her stand. She looked up at him as she dusted off her robe. It was Harry with Ron standing next to him. "Yes, my hands just sting a little," she said, closing and opening her hands to relieve some of the pain. "Here, let me help you," Harry said as he grabbed her hands. He rubbed his thumbs in a circular motion against her palms. Harry's hands were soothing, but it didn't feel the same as when Draco touched her. Maybe it was because she didn't know Harry as well, so it didn't feel as pleasing. Crabbe and Goyle passed by them. They looked directly at her hands while Harry was rubbing them. Crabbe had a surprised look on his face, so did Goyle. They whispered to each other and started walking faster. She was sure they were off to tell Draco what they had seen. "Thank you," she said, gently pulling her hands away. "No problem," Harry replied, smiling at her. "Hello, Ron. Glad to see you're feeling better," she said, smiling at him. "Me too. I never want to experience that again," he replied, stepping slightly in front of Harry. "So where were you headed?" Harry asked, moving a little bit in front of Ron, trying to keep her attention on him. "I was going to the greenhouse to check on my plant for her biology class," she answered, laughing a little, noticing how Harry and Ron kept stepping in front of each other when talking to her. "Would you like to have lunch with me, Ron and Hermione? We were going to eat outside today. I'm bringing the food," Harry asked, trying to convince her to spend time with them. "Yeah, come on," Eat with us, Ron said in a pleading tone. Okay, she said politely. She didn't want to say no after he had been so nice to her. She was still feeling bad about not visiting Ron in the hospital, so she agreed. Hermione would be there also, so it would be nice to have lunch with her as well. Meet us by the lake where I dropped you off with the pumpkins, Harry said happily. I will, she said, walking away and waving to them both. She entered the greenhouse and walked over to where her plant was placed. She grabbed the watering can from under the table and poured water onto her plant. She was growing a dittany. She chose this particular plant because of its healing abilities, and its leaves smelled like mint. She heard someone else enter the greenhouse. She turned to look, and it was Hermione. Hi, come to check on your plant too? She asked Hermione as she watched her go to the other end of the table. Yes, she replied, putting on a safety mask. Hermione was growing a sneezewort plant. It's a potion ingredient used to make confusing and befuddlement drafts. The leaves have powder on them that makes you sneeze. Harriet Potter was far enough away that the powder wouldn't make her sneeze. Harriet Potter added a little more water to her plant and placed the watering can back underneath the table. Hermione took off her safety mask and came over to where she was. You ready to go? Harry told me he invited you to eat lunch with us, Hermione said, smiling at her. Yes, I am, she replied happily. They walked out of the greenhouse and continued to the lake. They could see Harry and Ron sitting waiting for them. As they approached, Hermione noticed Harry tilting his head towards Ron, meaning he wanted her to sit by Ron so Harriet Potter would sit next to him. Hermione sat down next to Ron, not having noticed him give her the same gesture for her to sit next to Harry. Ron rolled his eyes at Hermione as Harriet Potter sat down next to Harry. What? Hermione mouthed to Ron, unaware of what she missed. Nothing, Ron whispered, looking away from Hermione. They passed around the food and began to eat. Harry smiled at her, delighted that she was here and not with Draco. As they ate, Hermione and Harriet Potter talked about their classes, all the studying they needed to do and the assignments they were looking forward to. Harry and Ron looked at each other, confused and bored with the conversation the two of them were having about school. Draco waited for Harriet Potter at the Slytherin table in the Great Hall. He was unable to find her before lunch. Crabbe and Goyle told him what they saw earlier between Harry and her. It was so hard for him to stay calm thinking about Harry with her. He knew he had to for her. He wasn't going to risk anything when he was so close to getting her. Lunch was almost over, and without eating anything, he left the Great Hall to look for her again. After they finished eating lunch, Hermione suggested they go visit Hagrid. She invited Harriet Potter to come along. She was having fun hanging out with them, so she agreed to go. They reached the front steps of Hagrid's hut. Hermione knocked on the door. They heard footsteps, then the door opened. Hello, come in, Hagrid said as he stepped aside. What's that smell? It smells delicious, Hermione stated, walking in. The spice cake. Sit down and have some, Hagrid said, pointing to the table. Hermione and Harriet Potter sat down at the table. Harry and Ron looked at each other, noticing that only one of them could sit next to Harriet Potter. They quickly walked, shoving and elbowing each other for the seat next to her. Ron was able to move Harry aside to slip into the seat. Harry huffed and went to sit in between Hermione and Hagrid. Hermione handed everyone a plate and fork while Hagrid cut the cake and gave a piece to each of them. Hagrid also poured a glass of milk for everyone. Harry, Hermione, and Harriet Potter saw that the cake was a little burnt and kind of hard. Not wanting to hurt Hagrid's feelings, they all took small bites while gulping down the milk to help wash it down. Ron was eating it like he had never tasted anything so delicious, and not even using the fork. A long time ago they used to hand out spice cake to children. They called them soul cakes. These soul cakes were given with the understanding that the solar who ate them would in turn pray for the souls of the dead, said Hermione as she took a small bite of the cake. That's right, Hermione, Hagrid said, impressed with her knowledge of the cake. Harriet Potter knew this also, but wasn't one to state facts out like Hermione. Ron and Harry just made faces, being used to Hermione's random statements. I hope you all will be participating in the Forbidden Forest search. Dumbledore's put me in charge of it. Thought it might be fun for Halloween, Hagrid said with a big smile on his face, looking at each of them. They all looked at each other confused. What is this search? Harry asked. Well, students will go into the forest to find a specific item, and whoever brings the most back will win a prize. In fact, I need to get ready. Supposed to be starting an hour before dinner, Hagrid said as he stood up. He collected the plates and glasses and put them in the sink. Fong woke up from his sleep and walked over to the door. Hagrid opened the door to let him out. You all will be there, won't ya? Hagrid said, standing by the door. They all nodded their heads and smiled at him. Hagrid walked out and closed the door behind him. I'm not doing that, Ron said, shaking his head. Ron, we have to. You'll hurt Hagrid's feeling if you don't, Hermione said, looking a little worried. You scared, Ron? Harry asked, laughing. No. Just don't think it's a good idea is all, he said, trying to sound unafraid. Hermione's right, we have to do it for Hagrid, Harriet Potter said, smiling at Ron, trying to convince him to go. She didn't want to do it either, but Hagrid has always been nice to her. She wanted to go find Draco and spend time with him, but she was stuck doing this. Draco waited in the common room for her, hoping she would show up. He asked everyone in there if they had seen her. He even asked Millicent if she knew where Harriet Potter was. She yelled no at him and walked off. He made Crabbe and Goyle wait in the common room for her while he went to look in the library. She wasn't in there, but he heard something was happening at the Forbidden Forest, so he headed out there to look for her. It was time for the search to start. A lot of students showed up to participate. There was a crowd gathered behind Hagrid's waiting for it to start. The sun was starting to set, and it was going to be harder to find whatever it was they needed to find. All right, everyone, Hagrid yelled, getting everyone's attention. Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Harriet Potter were near the front of the crowd so Hagrid could see that they had come. Ron looked scared while Harry and Hermione looked ready for the challenge. Harriet Potter was a little scared. She had never been in the forest before, at least she wouldn't be going in alone. The item to find is unicorn hair. The one who finds the most will win 100 points for their house and a self-inking quill. You have less than an hour. Make sure you are all back out before the Halloween feast, Hagrid yelled out to them all. Hermione and Harriet Potter smiled to each other when they heard the prize was 100 house points and a self-inking quill. They both wanted to win the house points. Hagrid and Fong made their way through the crowd and stood in front of the forest. Watch out while you're in there. Ready, go, Hagrid yelled. All the students rushed into the forest, pushing each other and heading in different directions. Hermione and Harriet Potter stayed close to each other. They pulled out their wands, making the end light up. Harry and Ron did the same, staying close behind them. I think we should find a patch of knotgrass. Unicorn hair gets entwined in it, Harriet Potter said to Hermione. Hermione nodded her head and made a sharp turn to the right. I've seen it before. I think it's over there, Hermione said, pointing with her wand in the direction they needed to go. Draco ran to Hagrid's, trying to get there before the event started. When he was close, he saw all the students running into the forest. He spotted Harriet Potter running in with Hermione. He saw Harry and Ron right behind her. He called out to her, but she didn't hear him. He was too far away. He ran faster to catch up to her. He entered the forest and lit his wand. He headed in the direction he last saw her go. He asked every student he ran into if they had seen her. A Slytherin boy pointed him in the direction he saw her go. They were far into the forest, and it was really hard to see even with their 4 lit wands. Harry and Ron slowed down and were a short distance away from Hermione and Harriet Potter. Harriet Potter started to slow down while Hermione kept up a quick pace. She was getting tired and cold. She lowered her wand and put her hand in the pocket of her robe. There was something in there. It was the piece of candy the first year had given her earlier. She unwrapped it and smelled it. It smelled sweet. She took a bite of it, and unexpectedly everything went dark. Harry and Ron saw Harriet Potter fall suddenly to the ground. Harriet Potter! They called out in unison, running towards her. Draco heard them call out Harriet Potter's name and sprinted in the direction it came from. Hermione turned around when she heard them yell out. She saw Harriet Potter on the ground and ran to her. Harry and Ron knelt down next to her. Harry moved her hair off her face. He put his head on her chest to check if she was still breathing. Hermione saw Harry nod, indicating that she was. Hermione began checking her head and arms for any sort of injury. Ron held his wand over her so Harry and Hermione could see. Harriet Potter! Harry said, trying to wake her up. Draco saw them all knelt down around Harriet Potter. He ran over to her and pushed Harry aside. "What did you do to her?" he yelled at Harry, grabbing Harriet Potter's hand. "We didn't do anything. She just fell to the ground suddenly," Harry yelled back. Hermione saw Harriet Potter's fist clenched and opened it. She saw the piece of candy that she bit. She recognized the candy. "She's eaten a fainting fancy candy," Hermione said, holding it up for them to see. Hermione searched her bag for the antidote. She usually carried several antidotes and healing potions with her. She usually needed them hanging around Harry and Ron. She found the one she needed. "Sit her up," she directed Draco. Draco sat her up, letting her head lean on his shoulder. He was so worried seeing her body limp against him. He just wanted her to wake up. His eyes began to water as he stared at her. "Open her mouth," Hermione told him as she opened the potion bottle. He tilted her head back and put his fingers in her mouth to force it open. Hermione poured the potion in her mouth. Draco closed her mouth to keep the potion from spilling out. "Come on, wake up, Harriet Potter," Draco said into her ear, his voice trembling as he held her. Hermione couldn't believe how concerned Draco was about Harriet Potter. She had never seen him show concern for anyone. Hermione began to think Draco genuinely cared about her. After a minute, she opened her eyes. Everyone felt relieved when she spoke. "Draco, why do you look so sad?" she said, touching his face. Draco didn't answer. He smiled slightly at her so she wouldn't be concerned about him. "Why am I on the floor?" she said, trying to get up. Draco helped her to stand while holding on to her. "You fainted," he said, wiping some of the dirt off her face. "I did," she said, looking up at Draco as he wiped her face. "You ate a fainting fancy candy and I gave you the antidote. I'm guessing you didn't know what it was," Hermione stated, handing Harriet Potter her wand. She shook her head and took the wand from Hermione. "Thank you all for helping me," she said, looking at them and smiling. "I think we should go now. It's almost time for dinner," Hermione said, motioning for Harry and Ron to follow her. Hermione and Ron said goodbye and headed out of the forest. "I'll see you later," Harry said, touching her shoulder as he walked past her. He was thankful that Harriet Potter wasn't seriously injured. Harry caught up with Hermione and Ron. They walked back to the castle, curious about who won the search. Hermione was sure it would be announced at the feast. Draco and Harriet Potter stood in the darkness. Neither one had their wand lit. Draco had his arm wrapped around her waist so she wouldn't be scared. "Lumos," Draco said, holding his wand above her so he could see her face. "There's that beautiful face I've missed all day," Draco said, smiling at her. She felt her face blush as she smiled back at him. Draco felt her shiver and pulled her closer to him. She put her arms around his torso to get warm. Her head rested on his chest and she could hear his heart beating. Draco rubbed her back and kissed the top of her head. He was so happy that she was holding on to him. He stood there quietly, rubbing her back, hoping it would keep her from pulling away from him. "Draco, what did you wish for that night at the lake?" she asked, pulling her face off his chest to look at him. "I wished for you," he replied, touching her face gently. "I think it's time for your wish to come true," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. She put her hands on the back of his head and slowly pulled his face towards her. She tiptoed up, bringing her lips to his. She instantly felt a flurry of butterflies form when their lips touched. Draco squeezed her body up against his. His heart started to pound hard in his chest. He placed his hand on the back of her head and entwined his fingers in her hair. They kissed each other softly, their lips moving in unison. Draco gently deepened the kiss, tasting the sweetness of her lips. They continued kissing, enjoying each other. She gradually pulled her face back, breaking the kiss. They looked at each other, breathing heavily. Draco smiled, keeping her close to him. The light from his wand illuminated behind her back, making it look as if she was glowing. He rubbed his thumb over her swollen lips. She kissed his thumb when it touched her lips. He never felt so happy as he did in this moment with her.